Okay, good morning. I think we've got quorum, and so we can go ahead and get started here. Okay, with that, I'd like to call the Budget and Public Employees Committee hearing to order. Are we rolling with regards to STLTV? Okay. Madam Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg.
Present.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Here.
Alderwoman Sanier.
Present.
Alderman Aldrich.
Present.
Chair Spencer.
Present.
Alderwoman Boyd. We have 5 present. We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. On our agenda here this morning, we have the approval of the minutes from Wednesday, May 1st. I'll accept a motion on the approval of the minutes from May 1st.
Second.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Would you please call the roll?
Alderwoman Boyd. Alderman Oldenburg.
Aye.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
Aye.
Alderwoman Sanier. Aye. Alderman Aldrich.
Aye.
Chair Spencer.
Aye.
Alderwoman Boyd. We have 5 aye votes.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We have just one item on our agenda today, but it's a big one. This is Board Bill number 1, our city's budget. This is the start of a long process. I want to recognize Clerk Kennedy and Isaiah for putting together, as well as Ryan helping to put out the long schedule of department heads, which we're hearing from over the coming weeks. And I want to thank the committee for being committed to this long and arduous process of delving into the city's budget. And with that, I'd like to invite Director Paul Payne. And of course, I am remiss to not thank our budget director for preparing the budget and of course being available to all of us throughout the process. Mr. Payne, you're recognized in the introduction of this year's fiscal year 2024-25 budget.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee.
I think I turned it off. A little button on that.
There we go. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. Good morning. If we could bring up I'm going to go over this presentation. I don't know if.
I'm sorry, Mr. Paul Payne. I thought the new rules are stating that even city employees will have to be sworn in.
Oh, is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. That's the new rules. Okay, thank you. Mr. Payne, would you, Madam Clerk, would you mind the chair?
I have to.
But
I can't swear, ma'am. You will have to.
I don't do, I'm sorry, what? Okay. Mr. Payne, do you affirm to tell the truth
Yes.
and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
So help us all.
Yes.
Thank you. So help us all? I don't. Thank you. You may proceed, Mr. Payne.
Okay. Thank you. If we could pull up the presentation, I was going to go through that. Is that?
Okay, and Mr. Payne, what we've got this before us as
You
well.
want me? I was waiting for it to
Sure,
go on
sure.
the screen, but. Should I just go forward or? 1 second. Okay.
Is this what you're going over?
Yes.
Okay, why do you got yours in color?
There we go. All right. The proposed annual operating plan for fiscal 2025 totals $1.33 billion. That's an increase of 0.5% over the previous fiscal year. And in the chart, in the illustration below, you can see the general fund, all the fund categories, starting with the general fund at $580.9 million. That's a 2.5% increase over the current fiscal year. We'll be talking about revenues later, but given that revenues are exceeding this year, that's actually a 0.8% decline over the revised estimates for next year. Special revenue categories at $255.2 million. That's a 9.2% increase. In the special revenue categories, you're going to find such special funds as the local use tax, many of the public safety sales taxes, and other special funds. One of the larger increases you're going to see is in the use tax fund, which has exceeded estimates. In the grant fund category, at $61.9 million, that's a decline of 23%. That's mostly because there was appropriation to the Department of Human Services of $12.5 million for emergency shelter. That was a one-time allocation from last fiscal year, so not repeating in the coming fiscal year. The debt service fund at $16.1 million, that's a 14.9% increase. That includes both the bond issue, the payments on the general obligation bonds for FY23, as well as an additional tranche on the neighborhood stabilization bonds of $6 million. So that's why that is up. Capital improvement funds of $81.1 million. That's a rather large increase. It's 92.2%. The big increase there primarily is because we're appropriating last year's half surplus in this year's capital budget. Last year when we had the surplus, it was a separate appropriation. If you recall, I think we appropriated it in February. But this year, when we had that $38 million plus, we rolled it into this budget, and that's why that number is so high this year. And we'll be talking about the capital fund later in the presentation. Enterprise funds at $308.1 million. That's a 7.7% increase. That is the water division and airport. And then the internal service funds, $31.8 million. That's a big decrease, but it's mostly an accounting change in how they're handling internal service funds, or particularly employee benefits. With the new accounting system, they were able to divvy up those particular funds, and some portion of them did not need to be appropriated. That's more of an accounting change there. And you can see in the pie chart below, still the general fund at 44% of the total is the largest of the single funds. So looking at revenues, or how we're doing this fiscal year, this is through the third quarter. The earnings tax was up 5. Most revenues have been, if you recall where we were last year, we were looking at an economic projection that was anticipating either an economic slowdown, if not an actual recession, and we budgeted accordingly. But we haven't actually seen that this year, so which is good. So some of our revenues are exceeding estimates. But we have seen some slowing down of the growth. So if you look at the charts below, earnings tax, it's up 5.9%, with the withholding portion of that up 5.7%, and corporate receipts are actually up 7.5%. Our 10-year growth rate on the earnings tax is about 3.8%, so it's exceeding its normal trend. The payroll tax, however, is up 1.6%, which is less than half of the earnings tax growth rate. So we have been seeing some pullback in that earnings tax, even though it's still growing, and the budget anticipated a small decline. It's up, but it's slower in the growth rate. And this 10-year growth rate is about 2.1%. In the area of the sales tax was through the third quarter was actually only slightly up, almost flat, 0.6%. We'll see how we do in the fourth quarter, but that shows that it's still positive. But again, usually when we have a sales, if you have a slowdown, the sales tax is the first one to indicate any sort of trouble, and so it's up 0.6%. The big increase we've seen this year in the taxes were in the local use tax, which was up 27.7%. I believe that most of that is going to be reflective of the fact that it's been now just a little over a year since the expansion of the tax base tax. In other words, the third-party online sales that were not included previously are now included in that base. I'm expecting, however, that it's going to hit a wall eventually, because 27% increase is not something that you can maintain. So once that base is fully incorporated, what it should be, you should start seeing a flattening out. So when we talk about next year, we're appropriating this year's excess, but we're not anticipating continued growth going into next year. And finally, just another indication of how our local economy is going. We included restaurant and hotels gross receipts taxes. Restaurant gross receipts tax was up 4.6%, so it's still showing some growth there. I believe that a lot of this also incorporates the recent inflation increase. So while the trend is up, it is actually following inflation. Our 10-year growth rate on the restaurant gross receipts is more like 2.9%. And the hotel gross receipts is up 2.4% through the third quarter. It is also anticipating, given projections for conventions and tourism this year, that it would be somewhat smaller growth this coming fiscal year. On the next slide, it is an indication of where we are overall in terms of projecting on revenue. You can see the general fund, where we were, the revised revenue estimate through the third quarter. So I can see on the general fund total, it's $18.6 million. The local use tax was 11.5, and you can see the ups and downs. Now, while the local use tax is up, I should point out that when you see that, the sales tax generates about 3.5 times what the local use tax does. So it's not an equal swap, but it is there. So we are appropriating those funds for FY20. And then the final, you can see the final column. You can see that and then again, this is just general fund, special fund. You can see that we're anticipating little growth in terms of the general fund, because we're going to be talking about that in a second, about some of the estimates on revenue. Okay, the general fund. So if you start with the the FY24, the current year's fiscal estimate of 566.9, what other adjustments are you going to make in order to provide an estimate for FY25? Well, we are tracking higher this year, so you add that to the base. That's through the third quarter of about 18.6. And also included in those revenues, there were some one-time charges catching up with a few of the TIFs that hadn't been fully charged off on revenues. That's a one-time hit, so we'll get that added back into the revenue estimates. We've also seen the new marijuana sales tax receipts have started coming in. They're a little slower than out the gate. I've got an estimate of $2.4 million. The most recent monthly receipts we got in were for April, were about $134,000. So that's going to take a while to mature, but the $2.4 million estimates that would get $200,000 a month. So we'll be following that as the year progresses. And then overall, revenue growth at 2.1% estimated across the board on different revenues would provide about $12.7 million in growth. Now, the big question, as you all know, was the earnings tax, and the particular risk we have, both the earnings and payroll tax. And with that particularly unknown going into the coming fiscal year, and as well as the current year, the question was, how do we address this uncertainty? Well, in consulting with the Collector of Revenue's office, and they've looked at some of the numbers from Kansas City and such, we developed an estimate based on a 15% reduction in the individual portion of the earnings tax. What does that mean? The earnings tax is 1% on individual holdings and 1% on corporate profits. The corporate profits are about 21% of the total, okay? So, and the rest is, the other 79% is individual. It is estimated that over 2/3 of that individual portion is non-resident. So if you take about a 15% reduction in that, that's what incorporated into this estimate.
Could you just go back and say that one more?
Sure. On the earnings tax, and I've got different presentations I could share with you on the earnings tax particularly. About 21% is the corporate piece, and the other 81% would be the individual portion. See that 21? No, 79. I'm sorry. 79% is the individual portion. Of that 79%, over 2/3 is estimated to be non-residential. So so the idea was that how much of that is potentially reduced with any sort of commuter tax or that is not eligible to be paid into the city. And we, again, let me be very clear. We don't know this for sure. But we just need to be prepared just in case that comes up. So we will be waiting for that. And But just as we prepare the budget, we just need to be prepared just in case. And so that's why it's itemized here as a contingency reduction for. Okay, so we take about, and so earnings and payroll tax deduction, that's about almost 26. So if you take all these number adjustments, that would be $589 million as your base for going forward into FY25. So where are the increases and decreases in the general fund budget for next year? And I'm going to go through these lists here. For instance, the Board of Aldermen, you had a few positions reduced there. You also had some one-time costs, fixing up the communication systems here that were one-time, and so that resulted in a decrease of $0.3 million. Mayor's office had a position that was funded partially with a special fund that moved back to the general fund, so $200,000 increase. Personnel had a $400,000 increase, with mostly their personnel costs. It's $1 million up. They are continuing to pay for those the new accounting and payroll systems and that transition into that. So that there's some managed services that increase their contractual services. I have added a deputy budget director position to this office of the budget division, and the city councilor is up net 2 positions. In the finance category, the comptroller added 8.5 positions in the current fiscal year and is adding another 4.8 in FY25. That's a $1.9 million increase. Most of those are in accounting and auditing functions. In the non-departmental category, the non-departmental, by the way, is what we call Department 190. It's things that are not specific to any one department. We have the Convention Center Asset Preservation Payment, which goes up with the CPI. We also have the Scott Trade Debt, which is the Enterprise Center debt, which goes up $100,000. The big change in this, in the non-departmental accounts, is that we made our final Dome Asset Preservation payment of $1 million this fiscal year. So it's no longer to be repeated, so that we're done with that, that obligation going forward. In the Department of Parks, Recreation, and Forestry, a number of changes here. There were some internal changes, moving payroll specialists through the various divisions from the director's office. But you'll see, the bigger numbers here are on this higher salary base with forestry and parks. You're also going to see this in streets and refuse, where there are some salary adjustments that were awarded to heavy equipment operators and those kind of positions this year. And so you're going to see some higher base on a couple of those departments. And that's where most of those increases are. You've got some parks divisions and pool maintenance supplies, but most of these are in the salary changes. In the judicial offices, the circuit court has got an electronic monitoring program, which was grant funded before. It's also seen an increase in case management services of $100,000. The bigger increase there is you're going to see probation and juvenile detention. They've seen an increase in referrals of juveniles to their facility, and they're adding 14 positions. That's a $2 million increase. A number of years ago, we did receive additional revenue from the Raise the Age legislation, and that's primarily the driver by the increase in referrals to juvenile detention. Circuit attorney is up by 3.5 positions in the general fund. That's a $1.4 million increase with other funds offsetting some of those increases. The sheriff was primarily flat here. It's a $200,000 increase, although there were, can anticipate that there were requests that were higher than that, certainly. The city courts is down in their Regis costs. But overall in judicial offices, that's a $5 million increase. In county offices, the big changes there, election board, obviously it's an election year, and we have 4 scheduled elections, so their costs are going to be higher next year. And the medical examiner contracts were up about $400,000. In the Department of Streets, as I mentioned, there were the salary adjustments. Let me highlight a couple of other things. In the street division, you're going to hear every year they purchase salt by about $500,000 a year. Because we had such a mild winter this year, they didn't utilize their salt, so they didn't request any additional salt payments. They usually have a pretty good supply of salt, so they've got a number of years supplied up, and so we believe that they're probably safe where they're at right now. The other change in the refuse division on the transfer stations, while the increase in the cost it goes up with inflation, the tonnage is actually less than what was estimated in the current fiscal. That's why you see that reduction of $700,000 in the transfer station cost. And the other items within street division are mostly salary changes. In the area of public safety, police pension, while police overall, there's some attrition and changes to other funds, charges to other funds, police by itself is pretty much flat if you take all funds into consideration. The overall general fund budget is down by 1.2, but you'll see the use tax is up and some of the other special funds are up as well. But they've utilized some attrition savings. They put some more additional funds into contractual services and such. But overall, their general fund budget is down by 1.2, but they're overall flat budget. The increase in the fire department is mostly driven by, is not necessarily an increase in all fund, in the general fund. It is an increase in the general fund, but it's not a general increase across the funds, because in the what's called the GEMT, that's the Ground Emergency Management Transport. Because of their staffing levels, they've had to utilize third-party transports more in this past fiscal year and going back a little while. And what that does, that definitely allows them to address the need, but it also reduces the amount that could be reimbursed from GEMT. And we had been using those funds that were within GEMT to offset some of the salary costs in the fire department. So with that reduction in revenues to the GEMT, we can't charge as much to that fund, so the general fund salaries for fire go up. And that's why you saw that increase, or that's why you're seeing that increase there. Other areas of public safety, the director's office had some contractual service line items that were only this year that were reduced. The Office of Violence Prevention, if you recall, that was a $2.6 million budget this year. It's higher this year, but the entire operation, that's been moved to the local use. So you'll see that in a minute. The building division has a permit system. It's a new software development that allows them to manage their permitting, and that's a prorated cost. The overall cost is $1.3 million. $1 million of that is in the general fund. The other two, building demo and lead funds, participate in the sharing of those costs. The bigger reduction you're going to see here in the Office of Public Safety is in the City Justice Center. They have been maintaining a very high number of vacancies for a number of years now. And the question was, how is the staffing model changed? What this does is reduces 65 vacant correctional officers. They're all over 120 vacant now. It does increase the overtime. But basically what we've seen is they've budgeted all these positions and then used those for transfers for other things. And so we believe that this reduction should be manageable within the fiscal year. Obviously, if you get to the point where you're starting to fill all those positions, then that's a different issue, and we can address that when it comes up. But the reduction here has seemed reasonable within past history over the last few years. And no other, those are the major hits on public safety. In the Board of Public Service, the bigger increases there. President of the board, they had some salary charges to projects, which we make sure that they don't overspend, but you have to make sure that the projects are available to charge off against, and so that was a $600,000 increase this year. Facilities management, mostly the contractual utilities and maintaining our city buildings, and then fleet, ESD, which maintains our city fleet, had some minor increases in contractual fleet services. So the overall increases of $14.1 million, leaving us with a budget of $580.9 million. In terms of revenue, the general fund revenue outlook, again, on the earnings tax, estimated at $210.6 million. That's actually a 5.2% decrease. What that is that's reflecting the adjustment that I mentioned before in terms of underlying growth, but then the reduction in the individual portion of the earnings tax. Property tax, that's at $81.4 million, it's a 1.7% increase. Sales taxes, $62.4 million. The appropriation is $62.4 million, that's a 2.8% increase. And I've got the marijuana sales tax at $2.4 million, which again, as a new tax, is going to require some monitoring to make sure how we perform against that estimate. On the payroll tax of $40.4 million, that's an 8.1% decrease. Again, that's one of the ones between that and the earnings tax is one of the ones that was reduced as a contingency reduction. The franchise utility taxes, $57.5 million, that's a 4.4% increase. Intergovernmental funds, $21 million, that's 1.9%. Intergovernmental funds are mostly payments that you'll see from the state, like the gas tax, the auto sales tax, and things like that. That's why that are as taxes that are collected by the state and then distributed to the city. Licenses are mostly flat at $13.3 million. Departmental fees and fines, $59.7 million. And then other categories, which would be like transfers from the Convention and Tourism Fund and such, at $32.2 million. And that again produces the $580.9 million estimate, which is down 0.8% from the current revised estimate for the current fiscal year. And in the pie chart below, you can see the earnings tax still remains the largest portion of the general fund at 36.3% of the budget. On the next slide, I won't go into all the details on this because I've already discussed it, but this is just the illustration of the budget by department. General government at $42.4 million, finance at $15.8, which includes comptroller's increases, which I talked about earlier. Let's see, in Parks and Recreation, that's mostly the salary increases within that department. Judicial office we talked about with some of the larger increases being at Juvenile Detention Center. In the county offices, 12.1% increase, or 12.1 million at 13% increase. Election board scheduled elections. Let's see, streets, 55.2 million, that incorporates also the salary increase as well as the reductions in both the snow pickup and or the salt purchases as well as the refuse transfer station decline. Public safety at $287.9 million, slightly down. Again, the police will see increases in the other funds offsetting that decline. And then Board of Public Service at $43.2 million is a 4% increase. And then the largest portion of this budget, 49.6%, is to public safety. In the next slide, sort of highlight, this is a highlight of some of the special funds in addition to the general fund. And the first one being the local use tax. Now, as I mentioned, the local use tax has been seen a significant increase this year at $27.7 million. Its revised estimate was 61.8, which should produce $11.5 million in addition to the normal recurring revenue. So some of the increases here, we've got a formula distribution. The first three would be affordable housing, which typically by ordinance gets $5 million. We've been allocating $6.5 million each year, and that's what we were doing, continuing into FY25. Plus, they also had some additional revenue. They generate revenue from payments on loans and such of about $300,000. The Healthcare Trust Fund is also allocated by formula through ordinance, and it's a $5 million per year. Last year, it incorporated the new behavioral health unit of the Department of Health. It also will be funding the new, in the Department of Health, when you get to that part in the budget, a breakout of the Health Commissioner's Office of about $900,000. So that's a total of $5 million. Building demolition is allocated $3 million, also by ordinance. So once you take all those three off the top, then that leaves you with excess use tax fund of $58.8 million. And most of the ones you see listed there are in bold are the ones where you see significant changes. So the Office of Violence Prevention is budgeted at $7.5 million. As you remember, this was $2.9 million last year. So what it's incorporating is that its base budget plus some of the funding that used to be funded under ARPA. In the police department, police pension, that's $26.6 million. That's a $4 million increase. As I said, that offsets some of the decline in the other funds. The health department, including inmate health care, is $13.7 million. The health department, in the current fiscal year, $2 million from the Department of Corrections was carved out of their budget to fund a separate health unit managed by the Department of Health, and that's what that additional $2 million within the Department of Health is for. Now, given that part of this is one-time money, there are also a couple of initiatives that are also one-time in nature. CDA is being allocated $2.2 million for modular homes and for addressing the pharmacy desert. And BPS, which is being allocated $2 million, $1 million for the animal shelters, and $1 million for Soulard Market. So that brings the total local use tax fund budget to $73.6 million. Another special fund generated by a sales tax, economic development sales tax. This is also allocated by ordinance. You can see those percentages. Those percentages are determined by the ordinance which established the Economic Development Sales Tax Fund. The FY24 estimate through the third quarter was $24 million. The 25 estimate is 24.2, plus there's also a reappropriation of unspent monies going forward of about $6.4 million. And 60% of this economic development sales tax goes to the transit purposes, and so which has been Metro. And by the end of the current fiscal year, we expect to have about $81.9 million accrued into that fund. The other categories are 10% each. 10% to neighborhood stabilization. That totals $6.1 million, and you can see that's mostly PDA and CDA allocations. 10% to workforce development. That's including Director of Human Services as well as SLATE efforts. That's $4.7 million in total. 10% for public safety infrastructure. That's a total of $2.4 million. There are a couple of recurring items there. The 911 supplemental to the Comptroller's Office to help offset the costs of that system, and as well as SEMA's mass notification system of $100,000. But the remaining amount of $1.9 million has been allocated to the PSAP, the Public Safety Answering Point, to mitigate that particular funding gap that we have right now for that. And then there's 10% of the tax goes to the capital fund, and that is appropriated within the capital fund, and it's including a balance, including a prior year balance of $600,000 for $3 million. So the economic development sales tax is budgeted at 30.6. Another special fund, the half-cent public safety sales tax, also referred to as Prop P. Sales tax estimate similar to the economic development sales tax, $24.2 million. And there's also some prior year balances that are being appropriated as well. And the ordinance, again, specifies the allocation by formula. 66% of that goes to the police department, $16.1 million budget. 28% goes to the fire department, which is a $7 million allocation. And 6% goes to the circuit attorney. That's $1.45 million, but they also had an additional $1.4 million in unspent prior year funds that are being budgeted here. There's now there's a use tax portion of the Prop P. So that, in other words, you had the half-cent for public sales tax, but then with the use tax going up as well, that the ordinance also specify where those funds go. And that's the second part of this illustration. 25% goes to after-school programs. That's $1.9 million. 7.7% also goes to the circuit attorney. That's $600,000. 25% goes to recreation programs. That's $1.9 million. 17.3% goes to building demolition. And again, some of these have little balances there that we're also appropriating. And then 25% goes to social work and mental health. So the total budget overall for the use tax piece is $8.1 million. Okay, I had mentioned earlier that the capital budget was up significantly, and this is an illustration of that. Proposed capital budget of $81.1 million. It's an increase of $38.8 million, or 92% over the previous fiscal year. Again, the majority of this increase is due to the inclusion of the $35.9 million in the half prior year operating surplus. It also includes $7.7 million in street and bridge projects. That's up $2.9 million due to the continuing increase in gas tax revenue that are being allocated to capital improvements. And then the capital, as the half-cent capital, that's allocated by ordinance. You can see it by the chart there, pie chart there. I also included the box of the $35.9 million and in the particular projects allocated by the capital fund this year. Some of the increases include $4.5 million for streets and paving, some fire department equipment of $4.6 million, some recreation center, pools and improvements, HVAC improvements, and improvements to Soulard Market, totaling $6.1 million. Some of the other larger ones here, the comptroller telecom system of $2.7 million, and other city vehicles of $5.7 million. And obviously the pie chart you see next to that is the allocation of the regular capital budget, the half-cent allocation, and the other park improvement sales taxes. In terms of personnel changes by department, all funds, this illustration shows the total general fund total amounts to 4,890 positions. That's a decline of 80. Most of those are in the Department of Corrections, so you can see with the reduction in the correctional officer positions. There was a number of increases scattered about, juvenile being up by the 14, and then obviously we moved the Office of Violence Prevention out of the general fund and into the special fund, so that was down by 18 positions. In the special fund category, it was up 52 positions. Again, the Office of Violence Prevention was up 19 because that was moved from the general fund. And then you had inmate health program, which was new, and a few increases with the Health Commissioner's Office. In the grant fund categories, 186 positions, that's down 38. There was a decline in police grant, which was expired. That's a decline of 24 there, as well as the Division of Human Services grants, a decline of 14. Enterprise funds are up to 186 positions. That's 6 position increase. Water was up by 5, and airport was up by 1. The next slide is just a historical perspective of where we are in just over the last 10 years in terms of positions. We've actually sort of stabilized in the last 10 years. We're down about 100 positions overall. See, pension costs. Now, the budgeted pension costs are expected to rise $1.8 million. That brings our total pension costs up to over $106.1 million in the coming fiscal year. So you can see this has been slowly creeping up again, and you can see the detail. Police system is at $43.1 million, the FRS, FRP at $19 million, the ERS system at $44 million, and there's the total for $106.1 million. Now, the FY24 budget, we saw an increase last fiscal year from the budget standpoint because with the big increase we had in pay last year, that contributed to the increase in pensions. When pay goes up beyond what's assumed in the pension plan, we do see an increase there, and we budgeted for that. But that just contributes to the cost that we say in the rising pension cost. And the next slide shows you what the funding status of actually the 4 systems we have. Starting with ERS, we've got a 786 market value, 847 in actuarial value, but we have unfunded liabilities of $1.153 billion. So that says you have an actuarial funded liability of $305.6 million, which is about 73.5%. Also in fire, in FRS, you've got funded liability of 92.2%. That's a frozen plan. With our FRP, which is the Firefighters Retirement Plan, is funded at 79.4%, just under 80%. And in the police department, or the police pension, you had 77.7% funded status. Now, I should point out, in these valuations, when you see market value and then you compare it to actuarial value, you'll notice that the actuarial value is higher. which is just how those things are valued. There's a smoothing effect. The three, FRS uses a 3-year smoothing, and the other 3 systems use a 5-year smoothing. What that tells you is that there's still some losses to be recognized. So if all other things being equal, we can anticipate to see continued increase in the coming few years based on that, those numbers. And the current unfunded liabilities are $633.3 million. Now, one of the areas we've actually improved over the last few years is the unfunded, or unreserved general fund balance. At the end of the last fiscal year, FY23, we stood at $127.4 million, or 22.5% of the FY23 budget. GFOA, which is the Government Finances Officers Association, has a best practice that you maintain at least a minimum of 2 months of general fund expenditures. That would be 16.6%. So we did finally surpass that amount for the first time at the end of FY23, and we do anticipate to at least maintain that above a level above that amount going forward. So in summary, the total FY25 budget estimated at $1.33 billion, which is a 0.5% increase. The general fund totals $580.9 million, which is a 2.5% increase. And while revenues are exceeding estimates this fiscal year, we do take a cautious approach in terms of revenues because of the contingency on our earnings and payroll taxes. That's a $26 million contingency that we set aside. Budget highlights include about $4 million increase in health insurance and pension costs, $4.9 million increase in the Office of Violence Prevention, $3.6 million decrease in the Office of Corrections, $2.67 million in streets and refuse, $2.2 million for additional forestry and parks divisions increases with operating salaries and some of the mowing cost, $1.9 million increase in juvenile, $1.8 million increase in Controller's Office, a $1.7 million increase in Circuit Attorney's Office, and just under $1 million increase in the Board of Elections. The capital budget at $81.1 million. It's an increase of $38.8 million and incorporates the prior year surplus of $35.9 million. So the budget is balanced, although it's constrained by this revenue uncertainty we're dealing with. And then there are other special revenues not budgeted, for instance, the ARPA interests, which continue to accrue, and those remain as additional contingencies. And that's the conclusion of the presentation. I'd be open to taking any questions.
Thank you, Director Payne. I will go through the committee by seniority here. Vice Chair Pam Boyd is not here. Alderman Tom Oldenburg indicated he didn't have any questions this first round. Alderwoman Velasquez.
I actually have no questions this round either.
Okay, Alderwoman Saunier.
I believe so, yes.
I think I may wait as some of the other departments.
Okay.
I guess in general, I would just love to hear just a little bit more about your budget process this year and how maybe just like, was it different? I know we had a lot more things like the earnings tax and other things that were being pointed to by the administration. So I'm just curious, like, how do you feel like that impacted as you had conversations with each different department, just general takeaways from your process this time?
Yeah, my general takeaway, and you'll see this in the budget books, we had, just in the general fund alone, requests exceeding the normal allocation of about by over $100 million. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, obviously, that's something that that's a pretty big dollar amount, and it's not something that I've seen that before in recession. Not that high in recessions where we've got revenue declining and such like that, where we knew there was, just simply because of the declining revenue, we're going to have a gap. but I had not seen requests that high. So I don't know whether it was something in the water or what this year, but there were a lot of requests that were submitted as from the departments, and you'll see that in your line item book.
Thank you. And a general question too. I know we kind of talked about it last year, and this will be something I ask different departments as they talk too. But were there conversations about really looking into positions that have historically been vacant and cutting those and putting that money to increasing the salary for positions that are essential and desperately needed for the functioning of departments?
Actually, where we did that, where we did that in the one area I focused on this year was in corrections, because that's been a notable one where the amounts budgeted for salaries ended up not being necessary in that amount. And so you see a big reduction there. They had over 120 vacancies. We took over half of those. And so it's been a reduction. Most other departments I have not seen. We've seen some increases in salaries. Some of those positions are being filled as we speak, but that was the big one, because it's actually come up simply because by looking at it historically how that budget has performed the last few years, they've had amounts come out for salaries because they weren't filling the positions and they weren't spending it. So that you'll see that in the departments, in that particular department.
Thank you. And tied to that last general question. So one of the things I spent my weekend buried away in all of our budget books and reading, and I'm definitely going to bother you continuously about more questions. But one of the things that I've really been looking at is comparing our salaries that we pay. I know we can't compete with the private sector, but even just comparing it municipality-wise to places who are right next to us. So whether that's U City, whether that's right across the way in Illinois, but really looking at that and really found that in a lot of areas we are in a lot of departments, we're $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 below in those starting salaries where you could just go over to the next municipality. Are you hearing from directors, or again, when those conversations are happening, are we talking about how we can make our city be a competitive place for the public sector to work by raising up our starting pay and salaries in these different departments and at least becoming competitive with neighboring municipalities?
I do know that the Department of Personnel is embarking on a salary study for it to do just that in terms of compare where we stand. Now, having said that, I also want to make sure, and this has been one of my caveats on any time we do salary study, that they take into account not only salaries but the benefits that come with them. Because I've noticed it was funny because I asked that question once and I say, well, what about the pensions? Well, they don't care about pensions. Well, we're spending millions of dollars on our pensions. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's not valued, then maybe there needs to be some reduction here, and you put more in the salary and reduce the benefit. I mean, mm-hmm. but we can't. But I always encourage any salary study or any comparison of that to take into account all the benefits that are being paid out, because it is a significant cost. I mean, you can have more than half of the cost of your compensation mm-hmm. in benefits as opposed to just salary. Mm-hmm. So if that's something that's no longer valued by newer employees, then there may need to be recalibration of those.
Thank you.
Sure.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director, for being here. Just a couple questions. So I know there's this contingent reduction because of the earnings and payroll, and I'm assuming that's based on the state legislator, which this is their last week, and also the lawsuit. Is there, I guess, what is the plan for this contingent fund if it's not, right now we put aside, what, 25.9 million, right?
Right.
Is there a plan, and I don't know if that's your office or like the mayor's office or ENA, is there a plan if the amount of the lawsuit isn't that large to then put that 2.9 back into general revenue? And I really think about, like, I know we have low salaries, but the mayor has been doing really good with the 3% raise. And I know that's having an effect on city workers of not getting that this year. So I was just curious, is there a plan for the excess money if the lawsuit isn't that large?
Yeah, let me describe how this basically works. It's not like we're taking money out and setting it aside somewhere. It's just basically reduce the estimate. Okay, so it's something that you say we don't know exactly what's going to happen, whether we get hit or not. But if we do, we basically reduce the estimate coming in. So in any given fiscal year, and this is regardless of whether it's a litigation or some change in, well, let's say it's a recession, we would have to evaluate what our revenues are doing as the fiscal year progresses. So let's say there's some litigation and it doesn't add up, there's no reduction, such like that. I'd expect to see in the first quarter maybe our revenues exceeding. And if it's by a large amount, then you can have that discussion. I think that's where you will know one way or the other what the overall impact on revenues are. But it's not like there's a fund sitting aside. It's basically you're knocking down revenue estimates for next year in anticipation that we're going to take it. There's the potential for taking a hit. Now, if that hit doesn't happen, then you regroup and say, okay, how are we doing? I can think of it in reverse. When 2008, not 2009, when when the big recession hit, and I remember looking at the first quarter receipts. And usually when you look at the first quarter, you'll see, oh, well, revenues are slightly up or revenues are slightly down, but nothing to be concerned about. In that particular quarter, I just remember revenues are down, they're down big time, we need to take steps, right? Mm-hmm. I think that may be the situation you find one way or the other when you get into the fiscal year. If we get a result that says revenues, there is going to be some sort of hit on our payments, on the earnings and payroll tax, that should start showing up. And we'll have a good handle on that, at least certainly by the midpoint of this coming fiscal year. So I think it's a matter of just giving it a little time. Let's get some more certainty in where we're at, and then assessing what the actual revenues are when we see them.
Okay. Going back to the marijuana, I know I had said I'll ask you about this and gave me an answer, but I asked about it again. So we're projected so far to bring in 2.4 million.
Right.
And you said roughly we're bringing in about 200,000 a month.
Well, and this is sort of a nice segue, because I'm always reluctant to budget taxes where you don't really know. It's a new one and you sort of wait, simply because we've gotten 3 months of receipts so far. Now, the first 2 months, partial months, expecting, we got I think in February we just got over 80,000. In March, which again, but expecting to be a partial month. March I was expecting to be a little bit fuller, but it was a little over 80,000. Again, I think closer to 85. And then April was 134,000. Okay. So I've talked with the Department of Revenue, and they said it's a new thing, give it a couple of months. The revenue estimate is at 2.4 million. So that means anticipates 200,000 a month. So we'll have to follow it, obviously, and again, it's new. But so what I've anticipated is $200,000 a month. I talked also with Kansas City. They're receiving over 300,000 a month, but they have something like 23 distribution centers. I think we only have 16, so it's a smaller pool. But it's one of those things. Given how new it is, we're gonna have to track.
Gotcha. Just a few more questions. So the firefighters' pension, if I'm not mistaken, you have it, at least for this year, just about, is that 200,000? It's
Because
an increase.
Both police and fire went up to their systems this year, but given that when we did the pay raises last year, we anticipated that 12 and 13% pay increase this year. Because of that significant increase, we anticipated that and put that in this year's budget. So the increment from FY24 to FY25 is less, but yeah, that's the increase.
Okay, but does this have anything to do with that firefighters pension bill that was passed by the board? Okay.
No.
So I guess, there's like a boogeyman out there that is going to bankrupt the city. Maybe so, maybe not. I'm not sure. But at least in this budget year, we won't see those kind of projections from what you have.
Yeah, these These numbers reflect anything that's been submitted through the normal actuarial process.
Okay.
Actuarial evaluation process.
Gotcha. Moving on to public safety, the Justice Center. So I know we cut 65 positions because historically they don't fill those positions. What was the thought around that? Also understanding that like the police department don't fill all those positions. Streets. Why was, I think the Justice Center is part of public safety, and I know half of our budget go to public safety. I could argue maybe it should go to other places, but I'm just curious of why cut the jail, which we've been seeing issues and issues and issues for a while now at the jail. But we know that like the police department is constantly over 100 some employees, but
Right.
we didn't touch that department.
Well, I think that's more of a policy call, and it's going to be it's something to look at, because I know that the department wants to fill the positions. So the question is, will they ever get there? I mean, that's a good question, but the desire is to get there. I don't know whether the end result would be higher pay, fewer officers, or what. But that decision hasn't been made. But the idea was that they're kept whole right now, and that is more of a policy decision than.
So the cut of the 65 for corrections, does that mean that, and maybe you mentioned that, is there going to be more money going into the salaries for the current ones, or?
It's just I think they did get increases this year, but it's not going to be over and above what you see here.
Okay. Let me see if I got any more. Don't want to run over too much. And maybe this is a question for CDA. This pharmacy desert that is in the local use tax, what is, and like I said, it may be a CDA question.
Yeah, I'm thinking I would leave that one up.
I could ask CDA. And I think there's just one more. Under the half-cent public safety sales tax, which is a Prop P sales tax, the one that's right there for after-school director of public safety summer jobs and police cadet program. Curious of what summer jobs is director of public safety. It just says summer jobs.
Yes.
They provide summer jobs.
Yes.
The director of public safety.
No, that's where, because that was for. Yes, I can't recall what the program is, but they do something.
And that's a yearly thing.
That's an annual.
I mean annual because of the half-cent sales tax. Prop P is a.
Right. That's correct.
Okay, well, maybe I'll wait till Director Coyle gets in here, because I didn't know they provide summer jobs. I think that is all for me at the moment, Mr. Director. Appreciate you.
Sure.
Thank you, Alderman Aldrich. Thank you, Director Payne. I have a couple questions, broadly speaking. We're looking at these incremental increases year over year. What is the anticipated inflation rate for this year? And then kind of, would you say the average over the last 10 years inflation would be?
Well, the long-term, let me reverse the question. The long-term growth rate in general revenues is somewhere around 2%. So it's not robust, let's put it that way. Now that has increased in the last few years. For instance, our sales tax, which had been growing, 1.5% a year, it's been up significantly simply because of inflation. Now this year it is actually trailing inflation, so there's some erosion there. But inflation is around 3%. I would expect in the coming fiscal year. I mean, there's a lot of debate about from the feds about where that trend is going, but it's somewhere around 3%.
That's kind of in line with my thinking of it, which has me kind of questioning or maybe having some concerns around a few things in particular. The payroll tax being only up 1.6%, the sales tax being up only 0.6%. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you think is driving a lower than inflation rate on the sort of payroll tax? I mean, I know we've seen a lot of news coverage of businesses leaving St. Louis, and especially our downtown area, but what do you think is driving a lower than inflation rate on some of these?
Well, it is a different base. I tend to look at the individual portion of the tax and compare that to the payroll tax, simply because those are still taxes on wages and payrolls. The thing about the earnings tax is that it encompasses both government and non-for-profit agencies because they pay that the individual. But that, which is a large second, for instance, the universities and stuff, that's a large part of our job base in the city. Those are not included in the payroll tax because the payroll tax is only for regular corporate and the not-for-profits are excluded. So there's a smaller base, so it is often more susceptible to declines in economic conditions and such than it would be than you would see in the earnings tax. I can't jump to conclusion just from this one. I'd have to look at it longer term. For instance, I like the 0.6%. I'd have to look a little bit, or the 1.6%. I'd have to look a little bit closer. But on the 10-year growth rate, it's a 2.1%, and so that tells you with the earnings tax at 3.8%. So while it grows, it's not as it may be that we have lost from the for-profit sector more jobs than in the not-for-profit sector. It's because of the different base.
Looking at our proposed annual operating plan, the increase over last year's budget, we have a 2.5% increase over last year's, for this year's budget over last year's budget. But when we look at this year's budget compared to the actual income from last year, that decrease of 0.8%, almost 1% decrease in the realized revenue from last year versus what we're projecting for this year is really alarming to me.
Just remember, that includes the contingency reduction
Correct.
of the 26.9,
Okay.
or the 25.9. So the underlying, if you look at that sheet, I think I had underlying growth of 2.1%. I was trying to it's on slide 7. I was trying to break out all the different pieces in the revenue estimate for next year. So I've got base revenue growth at 2.1.
Okay. Even if we added the 25 million back in to the estimated, so that would put us at, let's see, then that would put us at a percentage change on the positive side around 3 to 4%. Is that right?
I
mean, I'm looking
breaking
at
it up differently.
page
Yeah,
11.
you got some one. The thing about it, and this is why I broke it out separately, because you've got some one-time. You got the marijuana sales tax, which isn't growth. That's just a new tax, and then you've also got the TIF adjustments. That's a one-time deal that is also added. So that's not necessarily growth, but it is an additional revenue that you didn't realize this year.
Right. Where's that TIF? Where do you see that?
That's the second line. It's the third number on that column, the 6.2.
I think we're looking at different. That's 6.2. Okay, so the total would be 6.2, 2.4. That'd be 9 million. So we'd be looking at kind of like a.
What you're looking at, yeah. If you look at that 12.7, what you're trying to get at is what's the base, and the base growth at 2.1%. That's on.
Where are you looking, Paul?
Slide 7.
This is over last year's, not projected, but realized income. Base revenue growth, I see what you're saying, so that's 2.1%.
Right.
So that's just about a percentage below what we're expecting for inflation.
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I just, it is worrisome that we're not keeping up with inflation on our base. From a broad perspective. I mean, I think that's to be expected with a population loss and other concerns. I just want the committee to be aware that when we're looking at the overall financial health of our city, we're not projected from a revenue perspective to be keeping up with inflation. Okay. Can you talk to us a little bit more about this earnings tax? I know this committee had requested your perspective on the potential loss of earnings tax. You mentioned, that request was declined. But you also mentioned a presentation on the earnings tax, and you mentioned being able to go a little more in depth in that. I think to the alderman from the 14th questions, I was just kind of wanting to better understand where the 15% reduction and the 2/3 of the non-residential individual earnings tax, where those assumptions were coming from. And I think it would be helpful, especially for this committee, to kind of understand what else is at risk. The alderman from the 14th mentioned the boogeyman, but we also have the state legislature, which is a whole group of boogeymen, if you will, who could potentially, so kind of understanding what the risks are. We have this lawsuit, but we have other things that may impact our ability to collect that very, very significant portion of our general revenue.
Okay. I made a presentation to that select committee from the state back last fall. I don't know if I've got it posted on the website. If I don't, we can do that, but I could share that with you. It wouldn't have those detailed numbers because those weren't known, but it'll give you some background in terms of the earnings tax, how it compares, what the growth rates are, how does it compare to the payroll, how the property tax and sales tax, and just a little bit of history. Bless you. So that's available, and I can share that with you. In terms of what the estimated portion of the non-residential piece, that would have come from the collector revenue, and that's just based on what their assessments are. I understand they're also going through a new system to enhance what they're able to collect in actual data, which should improve what they've got. But my understanding is that's what they have concluded from what data that they have. And so based on that, given that there are a lot of unknowns out there, that's what we have estimated.
Okay. That's helpful. It would be helpful to share that presentation. I think the more we know about our earnings tax and the vulnerabilities there, the better off we will all be. Just a couple general questions. I know we're going to get into the details of the departments, but with the marijuana tax, you and I discussed our revenues on that are lower than we anticipated, and potentially.
I would say it's a little slower out of the gate than I would have anticipated, but that again, we'll give it a month or two, and we'll see what that total is. Again, in order to meet the $2.4 million estimate, it has to be $200,000 a month, obviously.
Right.
Now, it could be. It was funny because when I was talking with Kansas City, they had talked about their estimate for trailing too, but then in the end they caught up with a surge. So revenues are like that, and it's something we just have to monitor during the fiscal year.
Yeah, and as we move through the fiscal year, I think we'll just take note that we'll be monitoring that, and if there are any policy initiatives that this board could consider to realize, the full potential of that, to make sure that we're not trailing some of the adjacent areas in driving revenue on that front, I think it'd be helpful. Seeing that the president of the board is here, I didn't realize it was already 10:40. My apologies here. Mr. Payne, thank you for being here. I'm sure we're going to continue to have questions for you as we go through this process, but appreciate all the due diligence on the budget.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Next up, the president of the board. We have, my apologies for running over on that. We got started a little bit late here this morning. But, I just want to thank the president for making herself available. It's my understanding that the mayor's office is not available this week, which is fairly unusual. We're again this year, but generally speaking, from an educational perspective, typically we would have the mayor's office present first to the budget committee, given that the budget would primarily come from the mayor's office. Unfortunately, that's not the case, but we're grateful that we have the president of the board here to kick off our official department hearing process for this year's fiscal year's budget. Madam President, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I do want to let you know I have a hard stop at 11:45.
Okay,
So-
we should be hopefully fine.
Okay.
So, and just to remind the committee, I mean, Mr. Director gave kind of the overview, and then what we're going to be doing going through departments. Madam President has one of the unique roles in being not only the head of a department, so we'll go through that department, but also a member of the Board of E&A, which approved this budget. So in that regard, we should feel free to ask some general questions on the budget of Madam President, but when we get into other departments, as well as the budget of the President of the Board of Aldermen. Excuse me. Thank you.
So good morning, Chairwoman Spencer and committee members. I want to start by providing a brief overview of the Board of Aldermen for the public, followed by some key highlights from last fiscal year, and then conclude by discussing some of the line item changes for our fiscal year 25 budget. The Board of Aldermen is the legislative body for the city of St. Louis. And
Madam
the board,
President, I'm so sorry
Sure.
to interrupt, but I've just been informed that we may need to swear you in, although you're a member of the Board of Aldermen.
That's fine.
Do we need to swear the president of the board in?
I am fine being sworn in.
Say that again.
I'm fine being sworn in.
Madam President, do you swear to tell the truth?
I do.
Do you swear to tell only the truth?
Yes, I do.
So help us all.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairwoman. As I was saying, the Board of Aldermen is the board of the legislative body for the city of St. Louis. We create, pass, and amend local laws, review policy matters, and pass the city's annual budget each year. City residents elect one alderperson from each ward in the city, as well as the president of the board, and the board is made up of 15 elected members, 14 representing individual wards, and the president, who is at large. During the 2023-2024 legislative session, the Board of Aldermen decreased from 28 to 14 members of the Board of Aldermen. To increase productivity, efficiency, and analytical research capability, the board hired a financial analyst, a legislative researcher, an administrative assistant, 2 executive secretaries, and 12 legislative assistants. During the 2023-2024 legislative session, the board introduced 241 bills, passed more than 170 pieces of legislation, and passed over 200 resolutions. This exceeds the previous year's session to fulfill city obligations, enhance the quality of life for St. Louis residents, expresses the values of the board, and honor the leaders, organizations, and residents that make our city wonderful. Additionally, the board has chosen a meeting management software system for implementation in fiscal year 2025, and current negotiations are underway to finalize that contract. This new software system and partnership will streamline and enhance the efficiency of meeting management for the Board of Aldermen, benefiting both our staff and city residents. Staff members will experience improved tools for organizing and managing meetings, leading to increased productivity and smoother operations. So instead of our clerks having to manually enter every motion that is made at a board meeting, there will now be automation that is along with that. And so city residents can expect later this year to have a more transparent and accessible communication through better organized agendas and meeting information. Further details about this project will be shared by my office in the near future once the contract is finally negotiated with the proposed vendor. Today, my office is presenting a budget that maintains the current level of funding without any significant proposed increase. Among all departments in the general government, the board is one of the few departments to align its 2025 base budget with a decrease by 5.5%, which was requested from the budget director for from our 2024 base. So this is a fiscally responsible board, and this budget reflects that. When my team presented the fiscal year 24 budget, it was clear that this budget committee wanted to see cuts and not increases to our budget. And I'm happy to report that we fulfilled our fiscal year 2024 goals, have heard your requests, and have delivered a relatively modest budget proposal without putting staff salaries in jeopardy. With this goal in mind, the board focused on implementing initiatives to enhance operational efficiency, strengthen community engagement, and boost capacity. The Personnel and Administration Committee made significant efforts to raise staff salaries, many that had not been raised in some cases for over a decade, and is currently in the process of developing a system for conducting annual staff evaluations, a practice that has not historically been done at this board. As I have consistently emphasized, a talented professional staff is fundamental to an informed and responsive legislative body. Attracting and retaining such staff requires competitive compensation and a fair workplace. With that, I'll proceed to review the changes in the Board of Aldermen fiscal year 2025 budget, and my staff and I are available to stop and respond to any inquiries you have along the way.
Madam President, sorry to
Sure.
interrupt. You have something that you'd like us to look at to go through the numbers with you? For example, if you're looking at the line item detail, or if there's somewhere else you would like us to follow along with you,
Yes.
we'd be happy to.
If you go to the Board of Aldermen budget, which is in the 1,000 general fund in your budget books.
We have, I think that we have about 5 budget books.
Okay.
I think perhaps, are you looking at the line item detail?
Yes, I'm looking at the line item detail.
Okay,
It's on page 1.
okay, that's very helpful. Thank
Okay.
you.
So the first change in the fiscal year 25 budget is in professional services line item 510100, salaries of regular employees. We achieved a reduction in $281,215, enabling us to provide raises while effectively managing the decrease. This reduction primarily resulted from zeroing out 2.5 additional positions in the upcoming fiscal year 25 budget that the board does not plan to fill. The sergeant at arms and the legislative researcher positions, which we are cutting, and that was a total of $119,010. Furthermore, we consolidated the receptionist secretary role with the secretary alderman at clerk, resulting in additional savings of $31,640. And the remaining cuts were made by reducing costs for the legislative assistant positions from what was originally budgeted last year. So last year, when we hired our legislative assistants, it was voted to bring them in at a salary of $55,000 plus the 3% raise. And in last year's budget, we had budgeted up to $65,000. So that's part of the salary from savings that we're seeing this year as well. In terms of materials and supplies, line item 520000 under computer supplies, it has a reduction of $15,000. That's because last year we replaced a number of pretty old computers that our staff had, and because we replaced them last year, we don't need to do that again this year. Line item 520500 office supplies has also had a reduction in $10,000. That's largely because the board has gone paperless in most ways, and that has been able to save us a decent amount of money. And then line item 521000, communication supplies, $150,000 was reallocated to the appropriate account as evidenced in line item 561000, which is communication services. So it should have been in services rather than supplies. And those funds will cover the annual cost of meeting management software once the vendor contract has been finalized, and the remaining amount will be used for a constituent services platform for which the board will issue an RFP by the end of fiscal year 25. So that constituent services platform will allow for when people contact the Board of Aldermen, we'll actually have a database to be able to provide records for those inquiries that are coming into the board to help us make some better decisions about how many folks are calling on certain issues or emailing on certain issues, and be able to track the course of communications with the public over time. Next thing is line item 522000, facility and ground supplies. $36,000 was transferred to the correct account from 564500, which was major projects, contracts, and services. Although it might seem like a change, this adjustment ensures that the invoices for ongoing work of the board are paid from the appropriate account. So it's not really a line item change in so much as a redirection. Then contractual and other services, line item 560000 is computer services. It had a reduction of $10,000. Again, we needed more last year when we implemented a bunch of new tech, but now that that technology is in place and folks know how to use it, we're not needing as much in that realm this year. And then line item 563000, education and training services, experienced a $10,000 increase. However, this addition was funded by a transfer from account 565600, which is membership fees, which results in a $25,000 decrease in the latter. As a result, there is a net reduction of $15,000 across both line items. And what the education and training services goes for is we've had a number of staff at the board who have asked for professional development in different ways. So this is a way that we can provide for professional development for staff. In conclusion, I want to emphasize that the board's fiscal year 25 budget comes in below the fiscal year 2025 base budget that we were given by the budget director, showcasing a rare achievement. I keep telling Paul Payne that he needs to put up a board in his office and give gold stars to the departments that come in under budget, and we be at the top because I think we were the first to come in under budget. This budget does exemplify fiscal responsibility, given some of the issues that we have lingering around the earnings tax in particular, and prioritize investment in constituent engagement and staff professional development. Board of Aldermen is a professional body. With that, I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Madam President. In order of seniority, I will start with my Vice Chair, Alderman Boyd, who is on Zoom, I believe. Yes, there we go.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, when we had, from the difference from the 28 alder people to the 14, what decrease have we had in staffing in regards to that? I know we did one less, legal assistant.
Yeah.
We had one less of them, but did we cut staff any place else in regards to that since we have a reduction of alder people?
Yes, we, in addition to the legislative researcher position, we cut the sergeant at arms position and consolidated the receptionist secretary position with the secretary of the chief aldermanic clerk.
Okay, and so, I'm sorry, go ahead, I'm
We
sorry. I'm trying to catch up.
We decreased by 2.5 staff positions.
Okay, and so I see aide and / sergeant arms, so that's one position?
Yes, that was one position that we've cut.
Okay, all right, and the other positions, I apologize.
The legislative researcher, so we decided to hire just one of those positions instead of two. And then the receptionist secretary has been combined with the secretary to the chief aldermanic clerk.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Vice. Alderman Oldenburg, I think, is not asking questions. Alderwoman Velasquez.
Thank you, Madam President, and I will find some stickers and hand them out. No, great job.
I want my gold star.
I will get you a gold star. It's really amazing to hear that we've made advances in technology while still being fiscally responsible. I only have one question, and it's a small one because I just don't know what this means, but I think it's The rental and non-capital leases, there is a line item for office rental and leases. It's
I see that.
530500. It's under materials and supplies.
Jay?
All right, I'm asking an
For
obscure
the
question.
office rental and leases, can you speak to that?
Actually, that's something that Paul Payne can speak to. That's automatically generated in our budget.
So we pay for the office space here? Is that what?
Say again?
Do we pay for the office space in City Hall?
No, we do not. So that's a line item that I don't.
Yeah. Okay,
Copiers.
copiers, because I guess we contract our copiers.
And we
Got,
Yeah,
got it. Okay, they're on lease, not the office space. That was the only question I had.
okay.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam President. I only have a few questions. Same thing. I don't have a gold star for you, but here's some gold energy. So hopefully you can feel that coming to you. I wanted to ask about, so I know you said that we budgeted to go $55,000 to $65,000. Is it a plan for the legislative assistants to be in the works for any raises, or are we thinking that it will just be whatever the general raise for the city is? I'm just curious. I know we've talked about making sure our employees are, treated well. So will they be seeing any raises as they continue their time with us?
Yes, so the Personnel Committee right now is working on putting together an employee evaluation process. And because we think we did a lot of salary adjustments last year because so many folks had not had raises in such a long time. But going forward, we want to make sure that there's a standardized system in place for raises that is based on an employee evaluation model. So the committee right now is in the early stages of figuring that out, and our plan is by the first of the year to have an employee evaluation system in place. So going forward, we can use that as a guide for increasing salaries.
So you're hoping that by the time we roll around to the next budget season, for example, alders will be able to give evaluations to their LAs, and then the personnel committee and you all will take those things under consideration when you're looking at the budget proposal for the following year.
Yes, and as a part of that, creating a salary structure. So there could be a variety of things that are ways that are in that. It could be length of time that you're here, but also, evaluations from your alderperson or from your peers. There's a number of different kind of models for employee evaluation that we're looking at and plan to get one in place.
Excellent. My other question is, I know that the Board of Aldermen, one of the things that happened to us is STLTV. So we had to really rush to end committees in time and kind of didn't have the ability to do committees in the evening, which I think is really problematic because that makes government accessible to a lot of people. But I know that the Board of Aldermen kind of helps with that. I would just love to hear you, for the sake of the public record, talk a little bit about like the challenges that created, the ways that we were able as a Board of Aldermen to put our money into it, and whatever we're thinking of doing forward to make sure that STLTV is able to get the support that they need, and that we're able to have, like this committee is one. We've got to have meetings in the evenings. Some things through HUD, they take a lot of community engagement.
Yeah, great question. So as you know, earlier this year, we had issues where we couldn't go into the evening because STLTV had spent their overtime budget. We ended up transferring, was it 60? It was 68,000. 8,000. We ended up transferring 8,000 from our budget over to STLTV in order to help make them whole. I do think going forward, and I said this to Paul, I don't think that STLTV asked for enough money in their budget. And I think that that's something we need to look at, because even beyond Board of Aldermen meetings, we're hearing more from the public about wanting to have other board meetings for other city boards more in the evening, so folks can actually attend those. And so I think if that's something that we're going to start transitioning over to, there's probably going to be some increases that STLTV needs to make sure that they're able to cover all of that.
Thank you. This is tied to the budget, but not your line item. But it will be relevant to another department. I know that your office was the one on ENA who voted no against the funding for a shot spotter. And I know that a lot of folks in community had things to say, like that they didn't have notice, that they didn't know that vote was coming up. They felt, I mean, I heard from my constituents, a lot of people felt like because we get charged together as city government, that we just kind of snuck it through and they didn't have any notice. I'm just curious, as while we look at processes and systems, is there anything, when we know that there are things that are coming up in the process and that are going through ENA that would be of tremendous interest to the public? And a lot of times I do feel like once it passes through ENA, it comes to us, a lot of times it's just rubber stamp from there. Is there anything that you would say as a member of ENA, and it's like from your office, that we could do on our end, whether that's through budget or anything else, to put us in a position where we're at least being as transparent as possible and giving people notice and knowledge when we're going to have those important conversations?
Yes, I mean, my personal feelings are that we should be getting ENA to a place where it's operating with all of the advance notice that the Board of Aldermen is. So, for example, if we're hearing a tax abatement bill or, something like that, we have to have certain amount of notice, and all the exhibits have to be attached to that bill in order to be heard. And so there is some capacity issues with regards to staffing for ENA that I think has inhibited some of that from happening. But I do think in terms of being transparent, it's really important that we're getting these contracts out to the public in advance of the ENA meetings, so that if folks do want to weigh in on something, whether it's ShotSpotter or another city contract, that there is the opportunity to do that and the ability to review that proposed contract in advance of the meeting. So it's something I'm aware of, and it's on our radar to kind of figure out how to fix.
Thank you, Madam President.
Alderman Eldridge.
Thank you, Madam President, members of the committee. Just a comment. Also, want to thank you for the reduction. I know this committee kind of had concerns about that last year. And I see that the Board of Aldermen is one of few departments that actually cut positions. So as like the earnings tax is looming, I think that is good. And also appreciate seeing it in the line items, but also being at the board, appreciate the growth of our employees and the raises that a lot of our employees that actually have been here for years and years, haven't really received a significant raise. I know the board is leading the charge, especially when we have other departments that may not get paid as highly, but we are trying to figure out how do we scale up all our employees, taking that kind of charge with that. So just appreciate your leadership on that, and thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Madam President, I have just a couple of quick questions on maybe the general budget.
I will do my best.
I know, so I think it would be helpful to the public, but also the committee, just to kind of remind everyone kind of how the budget itself is developed, passed through the Board of ENA, and kind of the role that the Board of ENA plays in that process. And then subsequently, I'll just kind of ask you if you don't mind to outline any major concerns or thoughts you have or reservations you have about the current, just for our knowledge, given your position on the Board of ENA.
Sure. Start out by saying, just providing a little explanation of the budget process. So prior to introduction of the bill to ENA and then the Board of Aldermen, there are a series of budget meetings. Budget Director Paul Payne meets with every city department, tells them to kind of give us what your needs are. They overwhelmingly come in way over budget, and then Paul has to make the kind of painstaking decision of trying to figure out where to cut and figure out what's needed. He then brings a budget to the members of ENA. We review it. If we want any changes to it, we talk with Paul. We work on figuring that out. Once there's kind of an agreement on the budget, it goes to ENA. That is where we have the first public budget hearing, where our budget director presents it to ENA. We have an opportunity to ask questions. We then have a public hearing on it where the public has the ability to ask questions. After that meeting, we can make changes if we want. Then after that, we vote it out and it comes to the Board of Aldermen. Once it's here, The Board of Aldermen has the ability to decrease line items. The board does not currently have the authority to then reallocate those decreases or increase budget line items. So if the board chooses to decrease line items, it then goes back to E&A. E&A can, take it or not. And and if they approve it, then it comes back to the Board of Aldermen and passes through the board. A board bill has to be passed before July 1st, or else the last bill budget that was approved by E&A is the one that becomes law. And so E&A has a lot more teeth kind of in the budget process than the Board of Aldermen does, since the board currently only has the ability to decrease line items and not increase them.
Thank you. That's really helpful. As you were again, the question, this is actually, Board Bill number 1 is technically the board bill of the president of the board. Do you have any major concerns or work that you would like to see this committee do or focus on as we are looking at this year's fiscal year's budget?
One of the things I pointed to from Alderwoman Saulnier's question is I do think we need to be looking at STL TV. Not only in terms of staffing capacity to attend more meetings that are in the evenings, but also in terms of their technology. We are very, lucky at the Board of Aldermen that we have put in place this new hybrid system. And as a result, we're getting a lot of requests from city boards who are wanting to use the Kennedy Room and wanting to use our technology. I think it would be helpful if there were some other rooms in city government that were equipped with this kind of technology so that all of our boards and commissions have the ability to take both in-person and hybrid testimony, and we don't end up in scheduling conflicts when everybody wants to use at the same time. So STL TV's, a lot of their infrastructure is pretty outdated, and we've even purchased some things for them out of our budget this past year that technically are now owned by the Board of Aldermen, although STL TV is using it all of the time, simply because we had set funding aside in our technology budget that they did not have. And so I think if we're trying to create a more open and transparent government, that's a place that we need to look at dedicating some more resources, especially because I think a lot of folks like the ability to attend virtually and not necessarily having to come in person, especially, some meetings drag on for hours and hours and hours before your particular agenda item gets heard. So that's one area. The other thing I think is harder and contingent upon personnel, but I think we really do need to take a harder look at how long certain positions in city government have been vacant and whether there's actually a realistic chance of filling all of those positions within the next budget cycle. Personally, I would be more inclined to decrease some positions in city government that we're probably not going to fill, if that then gives us ability to give cost of living increases and raises to folks in city government. Because the last few years where city employees have gotten the 3% raises plus the 1.5% merit increases, that was the first time in many years that a number of city employees got raises. I think we're still kind of behind the ball, and I don't like being in a position where our employees will essentially be making less this year than last year because we're not doing those same cost of living adjustments.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And I guess I'll turn it over to the committee if there's any questions on the general side of things to the president of the board.
I have a question.
Sure. Madam Vice Chair.
I don't have a question. I have a comment because ever since the budget committee has been meeting, what the president just said, I have been asking that question, but I'm not getting an answer. So my question I have twofold, I'm sorry. You all have to excuse me, I just got off a plane and I'm on a roll, I'm still on the air mode. But my question is twofold. One is, are you looking, or can we as a city start looking at auditing each department to see if they actually need the staffing that they need, one, and then two, to bring us to the 21st century? How can we look at departments that were created in the 18 and 1900s to bring brought up to where we are now, to see how to streamline and become more with technology to ensure that we're able to serve our constituents? And so, and then the third part is, have anybody even looked at from the last phase to start putting some satellite offices throughout the city? Because a lot of people they don't like going downtown for whatever reason. And so if it's in their wards, they might be able to apply for permits or get, whatever business taken care of. So I probably hit you with a lot of things, but I was just trying to think through what you said in regards to, and I like that because I kept asking that. If we have $100,000 in positions that haven't been filled for 5 or 10 years, and we have people that are working, well, why can't we give some of them some of those dollars to increase their pay, and then not look at hiring, all those people that we might need? Because realistically, we might not need those people. So that's just my concern. I'm really concerned about it because the population has went down, and then our constituents are already strapped, and then they're trying to get downtown to do business, and then we don't have this manpower to help them to take care of their business.
You raise a lot of great points, Alderwoman. First and foremost, and this might be more of a question for the comptroller when she's here, the comptroller does audit city departments. And so there are ongoing audits that are done through her office. In terms of necessary positions within city government, I think that that's probably a larger conversation between the director of personnel, those city departments, and the budget director and the personnel department to figure out how many of these positions have been, vacant for more than 5 years, for example. I think that would be a good number to know, and be able to figure out if we want to, decrease some positions as a result of how long those have been vacant. I also appreciate your conversations about being able to make it easier for folks to engage in city government by not necessarily having to come down to City Hall. I do like the idea of satellite offices, places that we could maybe partner with certain, nonprofits or something like that throughout the community to have some satellite offices. I also think technology plays a big role in that. Most of our city functions, people should be able to do online. And if, and I think it can, in some situations, save on some staff capacity by getting in place some technology. My understanding is it's either in place or it's planned to be in place, a technology audit that is happening for the city. And I know our chief technology officer has been working with a number of different departments to try to figure out what kind of database or software would be great for them to have in order to get more of their functions online and make it so that folks don't have to come in person. But in terms of the reduction in positions, I think that has to be a joint conversation really between the personnel director, the comptroller, the budget director, to create a proposal of what that could look like. Because I don't work with the city departments every single day. I'm not 100% versed on how many staff positions they've had open and for what length of time, but I think that would be a good thing for the board to understand.
I know, Madam
Okay.
Chair.
Thank you. Look, I asked so many questions. I think you did answer all of them. I think it
I
was
think
all
I
answered.
did.
So thank you.
I know Madam Chair had, she left for a second, so I'm next in line, and she said I could speak. So just a quick question. I know that you're not the head of all the departments, but I mean, as a communications person, as a former staffer at STL-TV, actually, I definitely see the need to support them more. Can you comment on some of the technologies that the board essentially loaned, and just from your perspective and the departmental perspective, what are things that we should be looking for and asking for? I know that they've got time to present here later in budget season, but I just would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Jay, can you speak to the, I forget the name of what that we purchased.
So we haven't purchased it yet, but we'll be purchasing a switchboard for STL-TV that will be used for when they go out to public in the community. However, we do anticipate buying other things that they may need. We have a list that was provided by STL-TV that I can provide with the committee, so you can see exactly what they are requesting.
Jay, excuse me, I just need to swear you in. As pointed out, do you swear to tell the truth,
I do.
the whole truth?
I do.
So help us all. Thank you.
So I can provide you with that list. Christine and Gracia in our office work with STL-TV. Get that list.
Yeah, I think that would just be helpful. I think for us to both see the need. I mean, it sounds like, some of this less technology, more just kind of basic infrastructure, and then of course some technology. So that'd be great. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Alderwoman Saunier, any follow-up questions on the budget as a whole or any other issues for the president?
No, I don't have any follow-up questions. I would just say thank you again. I know I'm always really impressed, particularly by Director Paul Payne, but especially now, like serving and learning how the process is, how all of you all are able to come through as 3 different offices, try to work your way through and figure this out. And I also would say, like, I feel as if the policy that the board has been passing speaks to and aligns with the goals that I hear a lot of the departments saying that they want to move in, as far as putting technology in place, being more realistically about vacancies, looking at performances. I would say, like, I think the policy is helping to create the conditions and give the technologies and support the departments need to ultimately exercise a very new, futuristic, ambitious city vision that I think a lot of us share, but a lot of the things that are needed to get us there are not there. So I would just thank you for your that.
Yes, got to have the right foundation in place to do some of the things we want to do in city government.
Alderman Aldrich.
No more questions.
Okay. Thank you, Madam President.
Can I ask one more question? I'm sorry. I'm trying to play catch up. I really am. So I keep hearing about Real STL. So, and I heard the president saying that the head of IT was trying to do something. So are we looking to make Real STL more in the 21st century, to bring them up more?
Yes, that is the goal, is to bring STL TV more into the 21st century. When folks watch our meetings, it actually looks like it is the present day. When they do some meetings out in the community where they don't have up-to-date technology, like they're in the 1980s. And some of the technology that they have is actually becoming obsolete. So I think that we definitely need some more investment in STL TV so that city government can be more in the 21st century.
Thank you.
Alderwoman Velasquez.
This is just a quick comment. I think just for general, and just to say it, and I know when they present, we'll hear it, but I mean, we're also really fortunate to have They have done a lot of groundbreaking work. They've contributed a lot to the city. And so just, I'm excited to hear this, but just for everybody listening and watching out there, like, we are as a municipal body really fortunate that they are a part of what we do in the city's budget and the city.
Agreed.
Agreed. Okay, thank you, Madam President. And with that, I did want to turn it over before we take a 5-minute break before the comptroller. The Vice Chair, Alderwoman Boyd, did have a follow-up question for Director Payne. And so I want to give her the opportunity. Thank you for being here, Madam President. Again, we appreciate you prioritizing the committee. Director Payne, if you don't mind, you've already been sworn in. And so I think Madam Vice Chair had a question for you that she was unable to ask previously. Madam Vice Chair, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks, Paul, for coming back up. I just wanted to ask because a lot of people that are sitting on the budget committee, besides the chair and myself, were not there 4 or 5 years ago in regards to St. Louis City and our budget. And so could you kind of say because I remember the conversation when we kept saying we needed revenue to bring us up to keep us afloat. And that was our biggest issue. We kept saying we need revenue. So now I'm hearing that we're not moving at a level that we thought we would. And so are you looking at what we talked about in 17 and 18 to be pretty much on the same line as where we are now?
Well, actually, in the last few fiscal years, we've had some success in terms of the budget and having budgetary surpluses and all, a lot of which has been driven in part by the inflationary cycle that we're in. When your typical growth rates 2% on your overall general revenue, but somewhat less maybe in the sales tax, and we've seen some growth there. And we did make some adjustments in those years. As you remember, there were certain fees that were increased. If you remember, we didn't, the refuse fee and such like that, to address that. I think the biggest challenge we have right now is, it's like the elephant in the room, obviously, is the earnings tax and the payroll tax. And until we get through that hump, so to speak, one way or the other, that sort of creates a cloud on everything else. Once we get some clarity there, I believe then you can look and see what our resulting base of revenue will be, and then adjust going forward. I think there are certain portions of our revenue which don't grow. Any fixed fee revenues, for instance, if we set by ordinance it shall be X dollars per unit or per month or whatever that is, and that's set 1 year and then just remains that same rate every year. I can think of, let's say, the graduated business license tax or whatever it is, and if it doesn't increase over time, obviously, and your costs go up, then you are going to be by nature just falling behind on those type of things. I think there are certain areas in the fee revenues and such where they need to be reviewed fairly regularly so that we can keep up with inflation.
And so the other piece was, because I remember we kept saying during COVID, we can't rely on those dollars because they won't always be there. And so we need to act like we don't have them. It's just like your house. You act like you don't have that lottery winning because it's going to be gone. And so we have to focus as if we don't have it to ensure that we can get our budget where it needs to be. Am I correct?
Yeah, and actually, that's a very good point. I think we've been somewhat spoiled with the ARPA funds in the last few years. We can be able to do tremendously good things with those monies, but from a budget standpoint, that's not our natural state. And we don't have all these monies sitting aside that we can allocate to these things over and above our general revenue. And our natural state is somewhat more constrained on the revenue side. And so in whether it's allocating either the ARPA monies or the NFL settlement monies, whatever it is, we have to make sure that the budget is sustainable going forward. So when we talk about whether it's structurally balanced, in other words, whether recurring revenues equal recurring expenditures, I would say we're not quite there yet. I mean, we're better than we were a number of years ago, but there are certain things that we always have that little gap. And it expands during recessions and contracts during growth, but there's always that gap. And so you really want to keep your eye on trying to ensure that whatever decisions and policy decisions we make are geared towards achieving a structural balance in the budget.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And I apologize again for not getting to you when you were up.
You're welcome.
We had one more question from Alderwoman Velasquez.
The one more question is contagious. So just a quick question from my understanding generally. If we were to do broad technology upgrades, is that considered, would that be like a capital expenditure? Does that go department by department? Just
It depends. For instance, I mentioned in the overview, we've got the building division, it's doing something there. We've got $1 million in their budget. I think that's more, I don't think that's equipment. I think it's more of a licensing thing. It's similar with ITSA, our information systems, where we're paying licenses and things like that which are technology. You will see in the capital budget, we do have some funds for upgrading courtroom, like $1 million, for similar to it's this basically essence the same thing for the courts. And we also had some funds, I think it was like $400,000 for the circuit attorney to also do conference room enhancement. It's very similar, but yeah, I would think if it's equipment, that would be something you do in the capital budget. And if it's licensing, that would, obviously that's the ongoing piece that we'd pay for in the operating budget.
great. One more question. Just kidding. No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Director Payne. All right, so we have Madam Comptroller next, who's here, but I wanted to give a quick, maybe 3-minute, 5-minute break just to members of the committee that may need to take a short break. Do we need a bio break, or do we want to go right in? Do you need a break? Do a quick. You don't need a break? Okay, great. Well, seeing that we don't need a break, Madam Comptroller, thank you for being here today. Thank you especially for being a few minutes early, right on time, so we can move forward with hearing from our Comptroller.
Don't forget to swear her in.
We have a new set of rules that I've been apprised of this morning, which requires all folks to be sworn in. That includes our city staff and elected officials. So if you don't mind, what I'll do, since you have several staff members here, Madam Comptroller, if you could all just stand and raise your hand, I'll swear y'all in at the same time. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help us all?
Yes.
Great, excellent, thank you. Madam Comptroller, you may proceed. If you have something that you'd like us to look at, I see you're passing along a summary. If there's a place in the budget book you'd like us to focus on, please indicate that at the time. Thank you so much for being here this morning.
And good morning, Madam Chairperson, and thank you, honorable aldermen and women. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to present our budget for fiscal '25. And I have several members of my staff who will be available to answer any questions as we go forward. But you should have just a brief summary of the budget for FY25 as it compares to FY24. That's what I passed out, something very high level. And the Comptroller's Office, as you know, we serve as the Chief Fiscal Office, and with myself as Comptroller, the Chief Fiscal Officer for the City of St. Louis. And in that role, I am a member of the executive branch of city government and the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. As you know, the appropriations come from the Board of Estimate and Apportionment. The Comptroller is a citywide elected official and directs the staff to assist the city's daily financial operations. Some of his service include accounting, asset management, as well as internal audit. And as I said in front of you, you have a comparison of last year's budget estimate of 6.0 million. This year's FY25 budget is 18.9 million. In terms of staffing, That budget was 116 staffers of FY '24. This year, we're budgeting in FY '25, 111 staffers. Some of the differences you'll find in the budget are based on the actual numbers when we closed in 2023. For example, we had a budget in personnel quite low in fiscal '24, for fiscal '24, but that number, how we closed in FY '23, was a little higher to help us base our new budget in FY '25. In FY '23, again, looking at the actuals, we closed out with 97 personnel or staffers. And even though we had budgeted 116, we closed out once again at 97. We were prepared for a lot more growth than what we have prepared for this particular fiscal year. We have a net reduction in our staffers with regard to our planning for fiscal '25. We've had a lot of personnel changes, lots of people who have been hired, lots of to replace those who retired, as well as those who took new positions. But the overall net is a net reduction, as I stated earlier, going from the budgeted 116 in fiscal '24 to the budgeted 111 in fiscal '25. We have tried to adjust our staff to meet the demanding needs of the new system, and we are getting there. We're doing a lot better, and that's pretty much the high-level presentation I have for you. I want to pause here so that you guys can look at what I presented and give us some feedback and questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. Just before we go on to questions, just real quickly, could you give the committee an overview of all the things under your purview? We have a couple of items, for example, the Gateway Transfer Center, the municipal garage. Just can you tell us just broadly, kind of, say that again? The multi-graph. Just, kind of generally speaking, what all responsibilities the Comptroller's Office has. We also were discussing the communications in the Capital Committee, for example, the telephone lines, et cetera. So it would be helpful just to understand, in addition to being the Chief Financial Officer for the city, you also have some other responsibilities and roles that are handled under the Comptroller's Office.
Well, I'll be brief. I'll start with the summary in front of you. As you can see, it's the municipal garage. It's the Gateway Transportation Center, the records retention. We have the TIF section in our office. I heard mention of multi-graph, but that is under the finance department by charter. The comptroller does not have direct supervisory or budgeted oversight. So what you can do is to we can get the Department of Finance as listed.
Kind of describe what these things are, Madam Comptroller, just because we have some new members of the board.
To help.
Yeah.
You want to?
Sure, yeah. I mean,
So Jason, if you don't mind taking the microphone,
yeah, sure.
you'll have to probably lift it up a little bit.
Yeah. So the municipal garage is the comptroller's department that manages.
I swore them all in.
One of the city's fleets of vehicles. I think roughly we have, I want to say, I actually don't know the exact number of vehicles we have in the fleet, but it is the city's office that manages the fleet of vehicles. Most of them are used for staff that city staff that can or will use the vehicles for city purposes. They also are used for elected officials as well. So the city, of course, has other fleets of vehicles, parks and recs and forestry and all that. But this is specific to the comptroller's office. We manage the fleet of vehicles that are used for staff other than those that are purposed for them. So any staff member of the city can and does come to the comptroller's office if they need a vehicle for city use. So generally speaking, that's what that section's for. Gateway Transportation is the city's the second multimodal transportation hub of the city. So we have the airport, and then we have Gateway Transportation. That is pretty much our train station as well as bus station. The comptroller's office manages that, but as you guys may be aware, it's really subsidized through the operators of the facility. But we do manage it. We have a station manager, some staffing, some security, and then we also have some management here from that facility. And then records retention, I think as it was mentioned, that is the comptroller's archive. So the comptroller's office is also responsible to archive city records. It's kind of like a backup backup's maybe not the right word, but it's essentially a backup archive. So we do archive many of the same items it's required by charter.
Okay.
Yep.
Before we get into questions from the committee, did you have any other aspects that you wanted to present to the committee before we go on to questions, Madam Comptroller?
We want to also add the aspect of finance. As you know, the finances for the city usually start with the comptroller's office and together with the mayor's office and city councilor's office. We conduct the financings for the entire city with regard to making sure that the financings, for example, for the airport, which is one of the big ones right now, that's followed through very professionally, and so that the expansion, as you know, that's going on with the airport can take place. And we work very closely with the airport. We also do, in terms of financings over the years, a lot of refunding. In the past, when I first took the job, there was no activity with regard to trying to save money, with regard to refinancing or refunding, and we have taken that very seriously to refund those bonds that can be refunded so that we can reduce our debt service, and we've been doing it over the years. Over the years, I can say that we have refunded and saved the city well over $100 million.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. And with that, I'll turn it over to some of my committee members for questions, starting with the Vice Chair, Alderwoman Boyd.
Hi, thank you, Madam Comptroller, for coming before us today. My question is, and I know I probably already know the answer, because in the past, you have always been the only one that had decreased your budget. But I think with inflation and stuff, I'm seeing an increase. So could you kind of let us know, is that in regards to increase in staffing or pay, or how are you looking at that?
Well, you're talking about the increase in the budget. It's due to both the pay. We all citywide are reflecting the pay increases that we've had in the past. And then we also, in our office, we had several promotions, which would cause some of the salaries to be higher, as well as we've added a couple, actually two, high-level positions, but we actually reduced one as well. We used to have 2 deputy comptrollers, now we have 1, and then we replaced that with a first assistant comptroller and a second assistant comptroller. So you'll see higher salaries in those areas. But we also, as we said earlier, overall, with the fact that we had several retirements and several people who moved on to leave the city and move on to other departments in some cases, or to some outside positions, we netting with regard to what we budgeted last year, we're netting a reduction. But in reality, if you look at the actual number where we were June 30th last year, we're adding overall adding positions because we needed to. You'll see that we were at 97, I believe, positions when we closed last year. And what we are hoping to do is in our budget have 111 positions. Right now, we have about 18 of those positions that are vacant. So it is our hope that we're able to, at some point to add, but we still have, like most departments in the city, lots of vacancies.
And so I don't know if you had heard earlier when they had talked about bringing the city up to the 21st century. And so with these positions that you added, do you think that will help your department to adapt to the 21st century on what the needs are in regards to the comptroller's office?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Most definitely.
Okay.
We have some
Thank you
very
so much.
professional hires that are ready and willing to do the work on behalf of the citizens of this city to deliver state-of-the-art work product so that we can deliver a very fine service to the city.
And I don't think people realize that the comptroller's office is different from other departments because the qualifications are higher. And so we probably never was paying people what they should have been paying in the first place. So I think that's an applaud to you. You're trying to bring them up to that level.
Absolutely correct.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Moving right along, Alderman Oldenburg, I believe, is not asking questions. Alderwoman Velez.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller, for being here. I have a few questions. One, can you just explain, just so I understand it, because Google's not really helping, what a multigraph is and what it does? And I know it's not directly over your office and it's in the charter, but
I know that there's printing that takes place there.
That's all it does.
In the
maps?
olden days, we called it multigraph. You guys call it copying now? Copying. Copy paper, copy, multigraph with ink and stuff like that. That's the biggest function that I am aware of. There might be others here could explain it better, like Paul Payne. No, yes. Multigraph, what is it besides ink and paper?
They do all the emotional, the printing materials and things like that. So I think they actually do one of our books, one, not two, but they'll actually print the documents and such.
Okay, thank you. Obviously, I guess I have a fascination with paper at this point. So,
Lots of it.
so I know that you mentioned that the records retention piece by charter, and it looks like you have been steadily digitizing 3,500 pieces of microfilm a year.
We've had the goal over 20 years now to reduce paper in storage, to make, you used to have these giant file cabinets with lots of papers, 8 cabinets across the wall, and now we have we used to have what they call microfiche, and now we have the digital, what do they call those little digital things? It's digital, whatever they call it. It gets small in terms of storage, it gets smaller and smaller. And so the goal is to make storage less paper dependent, less file cabinet dependent, and more digitized.
And can you tell me where you are in that, like the percentage of the goal that you're at? I mean, approximately.
We have a great answer right here.
Yeah, so a few years ago, actually, the comptroller purchased, so we have a vault that's on the first floor, and it's filled with records that date back to the 1800s. And due to moisture and stuff like that, the records, the quality of the records is starting to deteriorate. So the comptroller a few years ago purchased 2 digital scanners, very capable digital scanners. And ever since then, they're digitizing about 3,500 records per year. The estimate is about 6 to 7 years with the 2 scanners to be fully digitized, all the city's records.
And then,
That's, again, hundreds of years worth of records.
Madam Comptroller mentioned that there is an overlap between the registrar and just in the archiving. Do you all have a sense of what
Yeah.
that overlap is?
Sure. The charter the charter just specifically states that the Records Retention Office, the archive library is what it's called for the Comptroller's Office, is to archive all information of the cities that is published, so all published information. So what we've taken that over the years is, ordinances, so we overlap on ordinances, we archive all ordinances, of course, audit reports, used to be vouchers, invoices, just all the information that not necessarily pertains to her office, but also other areas as well. So the ordinance is pretty broad. It just, the charter's pretty broad. It says all published materials, if I'm remembering correctly. It's pretty broad. So yeah, there's some overlap specifically on ordinances for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. I've got one more question for you. I noticed on the line item budget too, you've got a line item and it looks like an increase for management consulting. Can you just talk about that line item? And
Before I go there, I wanted to finish up on the records, especially when it comes to overlapping. I want to introduce to you, there is a state law that is allowing the governments, whether federal, state, local, to know how long records should be kept. That law is not necessarily tied to the registrar's office. So therefore, you have two offices, records retention, which is in our office. There are certain invoices, checks, financial data that the register may or may not have. Right now we know, as Jason has pointed out, there's some overlap for some records, but we don't want it to be misconstrued that you can take away and just have the one office have the records versus the other office, because you look at the state law and that is going to be more guiding as to how many years the records are kept and so forth and so on. And I just wanted to just follow up on that. And you had a question on the professional services line item where there are consulting contracts. Those consulting contracts come to us with our need to perform the finances of the city. We hire a financial advisor annually, and those services include the work they do for us regarding the financings, as well as the work that they do for any financial question that comes our way throughout us performing our duties in the office. Also, at some point, they are going to do what we call a 10-year strategic plan. And so that number on that line item changes when they do that particular function for the office. And it has been done for us since the strategic plan since 1997. And it has really helped to serve the city in terms of what our financial future should look like. And we've done a really good job over the years of following that. The financial advisor does take care to follow the trends of our city and make suggestions to us when it comes to the refinancings that I mentioned to you earlier. They also take care to mention to us some of the grants that they see that we may or may not have saw. And so then we're able to take advantage of making an application with the help of the financial advisor. And there's, many other reasons why we have consultants, as you would imagine, that other offices would have.
great, thank you. I don't have any further questions.
Alderwoman Saunier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hi, Madam Comptroller.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. I really only have two questions. I know a little bit what Director Payne mentioned was the new 8 positions that you talked about, and I know you talked about really reevaluating the department and trying to see what was needed to get to efficiency. Could you talk a little bit more about those 8 positions that have been added?
Yes, I will. I'll start with the top. We have the deputy comptroller, which is by charter. It has not been added, but we also, in addition to having a deputy comptroller, we had a deputy comptroller for finance and development in the past, which is allowed by charter, but we reduced that down to 1 deputy comptroller. So you'll see our TO shows 1 deputy comptroller, and instead we added a position called first assistant comptroller and second assistant comptroller, which is allowed by charter as well as by ordinance. And with those positions, each of those positions have a function that is different. By charter, this charter says that the comptroller shall be the accountant for the city as well as the auditor in terms of internal audits. So the first assistant comptroller is focused on the accounting functions of the office. The second assistant comptroller is focused on the internal audit functions of the audit. And there are managers that report up to both of those positions to help those positions carry out their duties.
Sorry. My other question was about the tax increment financing, just a general question. I don't know specifically tied to the budget, but I know we've been cutting down the amount of TIFs. I can't even think of the last time that the TIF commission has even met. It seems like we're like kind of stepping away from that as a method. I would just love to get like how has that impacted your office, your general thoughts on kind of leaning less into TIF? It looks to me like we've been doing more abatements and kind of specifying areas, but just it looks like that's been operating a little bit different and how that's been impacting your office and your feelings.
Well, thank you for asking that question. The TIF section in our office is funded by the TIF operations. And we are have the function of making the calculations once those TIFs are approved. Somebody has to calculate what it shall be every year in conjunction with the Collector of Revenues office and other offices. We get the numbers and we calculate what those TIF funds are. And you are correct that there has been a reduction over the years. And in terms of the number of new TIFs. But we do still have quite a few that we continue to manage. And so that's how it impacts our office in terms of managing. We still manage because, as you know, the TIF period is the 23-year period that it can last. Some TIFs are less, but most of them are not more than 23. I think there has been an occasional one that's been more, but generally speaking, those are to be managed over a period of time of 23 years.
Thank you. I said I had 2, but I have one more. Okay. The other thing that's been happening is the Charter Commission has been talking a lot about the structure of government and different processes, and they're making recommendations. And I was wondering about your thoughts. I know you talked about an internal auditor. What are your thoughts on an external auditor?
The city does hire an external auditor each year. The mayor is charged with the function of hiring an external auditor each year. And that the external auditor is hired and performs an external audit every single year on the city.
And so the second assistant position and this, I guess I'm just curious with the new structure, which I do see like making it internal auditor. I'm really glad you're doing that because I couldn't imagine somebody having to do auditing everything that runs through your office plus other duties. But I'm just wondering about
not only in government, but in organizations, whether they're business organizations, government organizations, industrial organizations, an internal audit function exists for most larger operations, governments, whether federal, state level, as well as businesses, schools. The internal auditor is there to audit and help departments. The external auditor is supported and helped by the internal audit department. The internal auditor goes in as an independent overseer of what's going on in terms of the financial and other operations in the department, and they're able to report to that department how they can improve. And after the audit is over, lots of times that department calls on the internal auditor or calls on the Office of the Comptroller and asks for help. The internal auditor is able to do that. External audits are different, but that's the difference.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alderman Aldridge.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller, for being here, and to your staff as well. And thank you for, since this is always like on public record, taking it out of playbook from another alder lady, just being clear on some things of like the internal, external. I had a question, but thank you for explaining that. And also the multi-graph. Our city is so convoluted and crazy how you're over it, but you don't have supervision, which that's under I think that's under Chris Carter, who's the commissioner of supplies, but they do like our printing and our good neighbor guides and all the other fun printing stuff that I guess if you need, they'll do. And I think they located 1520. Quick question, where does our, like the city credit rating? Because I think that's like under you to make sure that our credit rating is like an A, B, AA, CCC. Where do we stand right now?
Right now, we are at an A category regarding our credit rating. We are an A+ credit rating with S&P, which is Standard & Poor's, and we are an A with Moody's, and I believe we're an A with Fitch. I'm not sure if it's an A- with Moody's, but I know it's an A category. And we're very pleased because when I started this job, all of those ratings were in the B category.
Oh, thank you and your team on that leadership. Some of the questions was already asked on the staff, but just to make sure I'm clear, this year you're asking for a total of 111 positions, correct?
That's what we're budgeting, yes.
Okay, and you currently sit at total positions that are not?
We're somewhere close. We have, that's budgeted, but we're 18 positions that's open.
Okay, so you're not too far from the 101. I know so this budget, we just heard from Director Paul Payne, like how Department of Corrections, they took a major cut in positions. We know like police department always has 100-some positions that they never will get filled. And I know this was something that Alderwoman Boyd brought up and I don't think maybe in your office, but what does it look like if we have all these positions that departments are requesting, but like don't fill? How do we maybe use that money to put into employees' funds so that they can stay, understanding that some departments may not fill all those positions, but that doesn't seem like it's an issue with you. You're only 18 away.
That's right.
Okay. Could you give an update? So I remember last budget year we talked about, and I think during that time, it was good to have that conversation because I think we end up maybe requesting more staff for the new system. Or was it not Taleo? That's personnel. What's this? Oh, Oracle. Could you give? I know that was a new system that was being set up. Could you kind of give like an update of progress of where we are with Oracle?
Yes, we did over the last several months add positions. I remember at one E&A, we added 6 positions to help with our Oracle situation, and the Board of E&A did pass. The combination of those positions included accounting coordinators and do you remember
positions for accounting coordinators, or for accounts payable and general ledger.
Yeah, accounts payable and general ledger positions. And so we added those 6. We did do some reductions, like Jason said earlier, there was some security positions that we were unable to fill for like over a year, and so we reduced the budget. Those security positions were for the Gateway Transportation, so we have a contract instead of full-time employees in security. But to answer your question more clearly, and that is that, yes, we have found areas where we needed to add employees to help us with the Oracle.
And we're in a much better, I guess, spot now with Oracle, because I know it was just new for the city and everything, and maybe technology, but are things a lot more smoother than, I guess, this?
Well, it was a rough start. It's becoming more manageable, and in particular because we do have more capable, I shouldn't say more capable, but I should say more employees. I think the thought was that when you have heavy hitter, new system like Oracle, that you would need fewer employees. But in fact, we found just the opposite. We needed more because there was a need to learn how to use the Oracle. We were a city that was not going from a mid-2000 system. We were going from a 1980s system.
Do you have floppy disk in?
Major difference in the learning curve of people. So we found that out the hard way.
Gotcha. And I mean, I'm new to the board, but the personnel director talked about kind of the age of the city, how they had typewriters. I don't know if you got any typewriters in your office.
We might.
Well, last, I guess, little comment. Appreciate the records retention. I used to work in the recorder deeds office, and I've been in the basement and all those marriage license. And one of my duties was to take marriage license from like 18 something and digitize them. And, you know, like you say, they get so brittle, and down in the basement, you got to keep the room temperature in a good spot, and you pick up the paper and it breaks. And these are important documents that, you know, mean stuff to people and to the city residents. So appreciate your office. And I know there's other city offices trying to digitize a lot of these documents to make sure that they're somewhere safe just in case of a tragedy or something, wherever that happened. And then also I've been noticing that you've been having a friend come down to the board of aldermen sitting in the comptroller desk. So appreciate to have some presence from the comptroller office.
You know what's going on from time to time that affects our office. And so I appreciate your welcoming our people. I think I'll introduce Craig. He's here. Craig, you want to stand? He's going to be coming on a regular basis. Sometimes he'll ask questions, of course, not on the floor, because it's not allowed.
We won't want to have to point an order him and say you can't do that. But I actually met Craig a few weeks ago. Glad to have him down there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, we appreciate it. Madam Comptroller, I just want to kind of, we talked a little bit about the things under your purview, but it is a bit unusual. The municipal garage, the municipal garage, one of the municipal garages is under the comptroller. The other is where would the other one be? You mentioned that is the municipal garage is just.
Well, we only have one municipal garage. That's 162. That's the fund number for municipal garage, and that garage parks the employees park there.
Correct. Right.
Now, the other garages probably that you may be speaking of, those are managed by the treasurer. In other words, all the garages are managed by the treasurer except that one. The city of St. Louis has many garages. And is that what
that's what I'm kind of getting to. So you mentioned, Jason mentioned that this houses many of the city employee cars, but not all of them.
Correct.
So the other
city employees park in other places. For example, and thank you for bringing that up, because I heard him say that, and I understand what he's meaning, and correct me if I'm wrong, that employees that work at 1520, there's a garage there, and they park there, the employees, but that's not managed by the controller. The people who park in the circle of City Hall, they park there, and that's not managed by the controller. The people who park over in the municipal garage, where we have in our budget, that's the only one that's managed by the controller. And what we are doing in terms of management, for example, that's going to be probably one of the oldest garages in this city government area. So we work with facilities management to keep it painted, to fix the flooding situations that we have and any concrete that falls off and all of those kinds of things. You'll see management, capital improvement issues coming from the controller when it comes to that garage. The Keel garage, for example, some employees park there. that's not managed by the controller.
Right.
The garage across the street here next to the, across the street from the municipal garage, that's not managed by the controller.
Right, I guess my point is more or less that it's sort of an unusual set of circumstances in that the
We thought so.
majority of garages are handled in the treasurer's office, which is also unusual, a different finance department. It's just and then we have this one that's handled by the comptroller's office. It seems to me like we should have a parking garage department that handles parking and that sort of thing. And this is just an unusual circumstance in that one lone garage is handled by the comptroller.
Oh, I see what, okay,
And
Jason is
from a government organizational perspective, why that is the case. And
So this is an occurrence that's well before my time, and as you know, I've been here 29 years this year, and so this is not new that the comptroller is managing this, but what Jason has pointed out, there is a city fleet of cars. And if you can imagine that the city's comptroller manages the property, which cars would have been the property, and back in the day, the cars would have been in a garage, and it made sense to have the comptroller who's managing the fleet of cars. For example, the changing out of the tags on all cars that are city cars, all of the building division cars, all city cars. And so then the comptroller has had charge of that particular garage over the years and still maintains it.
okay. Did you have any other staff? I know there's some other staff in the room under your purview that we just are not taking public testimony at this time, but if you wanted to add, if any of your staff wanted to add any additional insight, I'll leave that to you, Madam Comptroller, as the presenting.
I have my deputy, and I mentioned first assistant comptroller, which is over here, Don Neese, and the second assistant comptroller is Leonard Bell. Leonard, you want to stand?
Okay.
He did just come in, and he didn't get sworn in. He is the second assistant comptroller, and he is the internal audit person, top guy, if you will. And he has been doing internal audit for the city for 27 years. One of the claim to fames I'll point out is at the airport where we have rental cars. The internal audit, so that you get an idea of how internal audit works. He's auditing all contracts that have to do with rental cars, Avis, Budget, Enterprise, and all of those are companies that have contracts with the airport, and in an audit to see what the actual contract says versus what we receive in revenue, because the contract says what we should be paid, and what we receive may or may not match that. And over the years, I'm going to say, is it millions of dollars you netted the city? It was over $900,000 that should have been paid by the rental car companies to the airport that Leonard found that was not paid, and the companies paid us based on an internal audit. Isn't that right? And how many times did you find that particular finding? Four companies? Four companies, which netted us $900,000. And I say that just to give you an idea of the importance of internal audit. If you think that, there should be, you don't even think it. This is just part of our routine in terms of internal audit. What does it mean to have an internal auditor? And this internal auditor is able to dig deep and look at the contracts and find the amounts of revenues that should have come to the city but was not coming to the city, and those corrections were able to be made on the spot.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. We're glad to have that a little additional insight on the auditing process. And the Gateway Transportation Center being under the purview of the Comptroller also strikes me as fairly unusual from a government organizational perspective. Can you talk a little bit about?
I sure can.
And, we've had a lot of safety concerns related to our Metrolink stops. I know it's kind of right adjacent to, and if you could help us understand if it includes some of that, and if you have concerns about the safety of the folks that are using that transfer station, et cetera, it would be very helpful.
Before it became the Gateway Transportation Center and it was built out to be what it is today, it was called multimodal, meaning that it was going to serve as a multiple transportation center, which would include the bus company and the train company, as well as the Metrolink and possibly buses. And as you can see, you have certain stops around there.
And Madam Comptroller, just for everyone's knowledge, this is the big transfer station that's pretty adjacent to City Hall here, so.
The Greyhound bus runs out of there.
Yes, is it this way,
Greyhound bus
Paul?
and the Amtrak.
Yes, you're right, thank you. I'm
and
turned
the
around here.
You familiar, and it's at 16th Street, 16th and Clark, right there. And so that was built as temporary. The structure you see now, it was built with the help of the state of Missouri, investing $10 million to give us a replacement of what they used to call Amshack. Amshack was a very poorly designed building that was also temporary, and it was in place for many years. Now we have the Gateway Transportation Center, which is a lot more modern and a lot more nice. But the goal was to have an even more modern and even more larger to serve the city of St. Louis's multi-transportation. As you can see, transportation continues to grow. And because it's under the comptroller because no other office wanted it. And I say that sincerely, we took and because it's a property of the city, the building as it was built. And at the time, the fixed asset, or the asset manager, not fixed asset manager, it would be the asset manager, took charge and was manager over the Gateway Transportation. I think we still have that today. Yeah, to be management. And so what we have is a building that houses the train, and the train pays rent, monthly rent, to be there as well, and that's the Amtrak train, as well as the Greyhound bus, and any other bus that would want to come through the city. For example, we used to have Trailways bus, but the Trailways was, I don't know if they're still in business, but they were not part of the new center, the Gateway Transportation Center. So we have a contract with the bus company, and they paid their rent. And we have a couple of concessions there. It used to be Kentucky Fried Chicken.
City Deli is the only one
City,
that I know.
okay, the City Deli is the only one left. And they serve the traveling public, those who travel on the bus and those who travel on the train. The connectivity with Metrolink is important because we stop right there at 18th, as well as, right close by here. I believe it's 8th. And then there's also the bus, the city metro bus stop, which is at 14th. And so those connectivities are done with, it was planned years ago. And the fact that they are under the comptroller's office in terms of management, that, as I said, came about because that is a property of the city. And in those days, in the 90s, I believe the late 90s, it was determined that the comptroller's office should manage it.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. Just real quickly, what is the revenue generated from the Gateway, from those entities? In other words, are we the 2.4 million, are we paying that out of our general fund, or what are we receiving back? You said it was subsidized. I'm hoping it's covered by Amtrak and those bus line, the entities that are running out of the transportation center.
Sure, that's a good question. Gateway Transportation Center is subsidized almost entirely by the three main operators, City Deli, Greyhound, and the contracts require that they pay rent monthly, and that rent, and at the end of the year, they have a true-up adjustment that they make, and where we look at what it costs to run the center, and then any deficiencies of the center that haven't been covered by their rents are recovered from a true-up adjustment. They've paid every single year of their leases. And so to date, it's almost entirely funded by subsidies from these operators, including our staff.
I would push back just a tad and say the subsidy goes the other way rather than from the rent payer to the city, but the city, does the city, so my question would be,
Yeah, sorry, I'm-
the city subsidize the function of that at all? When you say it almost entirely covers it, is there, so in other words, this 2.4 million, is it coming out? Are they paying that back entirely, or is the city subsidizing the function of the Gateway Transportation Center with any of our general fund? Just for an information.
Sure, yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm confusing you. We pay the costs for for the operation of the center, and their monthly rents reimburse us for that throughout the year. And at the end of the year, if their monthly rents have not paid us back for everything that we have spent, then we do a true-up adjustment in which they catch up and pay for everything. So at the end of the year, and why I say almost entirely is because the current lease that we have has a 10% fee, and that fee was construed to be 10% of the costs are set aside for capital improvements of the structure. And so that 10%, if you consider the 10%, they have fully reimbursed us either through monthly rent payments or the true-up at the end of the year. They have fully reimbursed us for every dollar we have spent. Okay. But when you consider that the capital fund is set aside out of the general fund or out of the special revenue fund, it is underfunded because of that set aside for capital. So if you consider the capital set aside, it is fully funded by the operators.
Okay, that's helpful. So in other words, the transportation center pays for itself through the
Yes.
relationships with the folks that use it. Okay. And lastly, Madam Comptroller, on the staffing side, I know we've been struggling citywide on keeping positions filled. You mentioned you had 18 positions open, but according to your budget, you had 67 of the 101 filled at the time it was submitted. Can you help us understand what the current vacancy rate in the comptroller's office is and what you may need from us to get to that, fully staffed position?
Well, we mentioned that we had 18 vacant full-time positions right now. And then per performance, we have 4. But we have hired in this year a total of 18. We've had several resignations and retirements of around 10 or 11. So with regard to how you can help us is to support our budget as we've submitted it. That would be a great help to us, is to support the positions that we are now asking for. That would help us to continue our goal to increase the budget in the sections and areas of the office that we've expanded, like we expanded in the general ledger area, the accounts payable area, and we expanded in the accounting coordinators areas. A lot of those expansions and the majority of those are under accounting. We have a lot of accounting that we expect with regard to the dollars, the large dollars of ARPA that is going to be processed. It's one thing to have the ARPA dollars that we have appropriated and functions of a bill, a board bill and ordinance, but it's a whole nother thing to process the spending, and a lot of that hasn't occurred. Okay. So we haven't had vendors selected. That's a selection committee process with regard to having that kind of, you got to figure out what the project shall be. And then once those invoices come in to the city, they're coming to the office where the actual project started, but eventually they'll come to our office in the comptroller's office. So what I'm describing is what I'm going to call a bottleneck that we're expecting, because the millions of dollars that was received 2 years ago from ARPA has yet to be flowed through our office in terms of expenditures. And we believe that a bottleneck was going to occur in the next couple of years because or the law will be changed so that there's an extension.
Okay.
Without an extension, we have a bottleneck.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? I'm talking about the federal law, and I'm talking strictly about the, millions of dollars in ARPA.
Do you anticipate an extension, Madam Comptroller?
What I'm hearing from people who watch the federal government closely, and when I'm hearing the latest news nationally, is that 17% nationally has been spent of the federal dollars given to all cities across the country, which puts our city right smack with all the other cities that have not spent the millions of dollars. So even though over 100 million has been spent, keep in mind we received over 400 million. So then the question is the difference between 2 years of spending 100 and something million versus less than 2 years, well, another 2 years because you got until 2026. So if you spend I'm going to just say 150 million spent out the door, right? A check was cut, but then you've got over 250 million to still spend in the same time period. That means you got to double your efforts.
Okay. Madam Comptroller, it would be helpful if you could share that source. I mean, it's contrary to what I've read, but certainly I think your expertise would be helpful on this. The 17% nationally of the ARPA money.
Been on the news, national news. It was just a news story on the national news, and it had to do with the monies that was given to all cities and states and organizations. And so if you can imagine that would be quite a few organizations that the national, now I could find the story for you, and I'll try to anyway, but I could Google it.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful. Just I've heard different figures, and certainly our neighboring municipalities, I think, have spent out different amounts of money, but nonetheless, understanding the bottleneck, my question with regards to the staffing, however, your budget does show sort of a different, 30% open rate. And so I was just trying to understand some of the questions we've had about staffing, pay, and other things was kind of, what might be going on to drive vacancy in different departments is one of the things that this committee was sort of looking into. So I think it would be helpful to maybe understand where the vacancies are. I think your budget is reflecting slightly different numbers on that front. But I also realize we're kind of at the end of our time here. I don't want to keep everybody beyond the scheduled budget hearing process. But so in a matter of follow-up, I think it'd be helpful to have two things. Yeah, just an understanding of kind of where we are on the ARPA side, what we're expecting. Those positions, if they're just to be filling the sort of bottleneck on the ARPA, are they necessary for full-time employment? Should we consider, maybe contracting some of that out as it's a, 1 to 2 year need? We're not going to have ARPA indefinitely, and do we want to hire, long-term employees for whom we don't have an ongoing year after year need? And lastly, just kind of the sort of, the vacancy, a clear picture of kind of what that looks like.
Thank you for that question, and I know Jason's going to follow up. And we do not have a number of the positions just for the ARPA, but I did bring that up for a reason to just establish the fact that a bottleneck could be forming depending on how fast the expenditures would occur, because we do have accounting personnel managing the payments of those invoices that come in when they do come in after the project has been put together, and then we have the contracts, and eventually there'll be invoices. And we do have some subrecipients that we have to be mindful of, that we don't know some of who they are, that type of thing. So we just know that there's a lot of work to be done, even though dollars have been appropriated and yet unspent.
Okay.
And I just wanted to bring that up as a side. But Jason does have more clarity into the number and the actual positions. You want to point those out?
I can give a little more clarity. So if you looked at the summary provided by the comptroller, The reason why you see from 101 to 105, looks like we went down four positions, and in fact, we have. But it's that we started with 87 positions at FY '24, the beginning of '24, that was what was budgeted. And then throughout the year, we added whatever the difference is between 187 and 105. And then we subtracted 9 positions. We actually reduced, okay, here, 87% or 87 positions at the start of '24. Before the budget period began for FY '25, we got up to 105 positions through E&A. And then we reduced our FY '25 budget by 9 positions for security guards, but adding 5 positions for general fund. So that's how you get to your 101.
Okay.
So it is a net, gets us down to the 101. So we did reduce by 4 positions, but we, in fact, over the last 12 months have increased by whatever that difference is. And that's primarily just due to, retirement of long-term deputy comptroller, rollout of our new accounting system, and restructuring of our accounting division. Our division was, it just needed some restructuring. We needed a new functional approach to how we were doing things, shoring up our general ledger section, accounts payable, federal grants, sections like that. So we have now functional managers in place that are actually going to streamline the process much better. So we think we're really in a good position for the future. We're well-placed, well-positioned for the future.
Okay. Thank you. And with that, do any members of the committee have any outstanding questions for the comptroller or staff?
I do, just a quick one.
Alderman Aldrich, you're recognized.
I just got a few quick ones. I think the confusion, and maybe I'm also looking at, I think because it says 2024 occupied positions says 67, but asks for 105. So I don't know when like the cycle ends and starts of maybe hire more, but that's, I had a question about it, but maybe I was reading it differently. But and then I know asking for 101, so I guess was asking like, what is that gap from the 24, 67 positions? You asked for 105, and now you ask for 101. So that's how many have been filled from that 67 positions that was maybe occupied, I think.
Yeah, in my experience, the difference between the two generally throughout the year. So I don't know what that answer is exactly between 67 and 87, and I can get you the answer, but I would suspect that it's throughout the year, positions being added throughout the year. Over time, the last couple of years, we have built up staff in order to restructure and alleviate and to plan for the future. So we, in fact, have increased our staff the last couple of years. Noticing and planning for the future, new accounting system, new structure in the staff, long-term employees retiring, really setting ourselves up for the future. But I can get you the answer between the 67 and the 87.
I think it would be helpful. It's my understanding that these numbers should reflect the budget as presented to the budget director in March. So if there's just to have an understanding of what the staffing is would be helpful.
And then the other question, can the comptroller, going back to the audit, do audits of offices within City Hall? Is that something that is up to your purview?
Or could you repeat it?
Do you do audits to offices within City Hall? Is that under like the the comptroller?
Absolutely, we do.
Okay. Is that like a request of some, or is that just an annual thing of each city?
Some are annual and some are requested.
Okay. And then lastly, not hitting the garage and going back to all that, the front end of the City Hall, is that under under your purview?
Sorta.
Okay. No more questions.
Thank you. And it looks like Madam Vice Chair had a question. Madam Vice Chair, did you have your hand raised?
It's not a question. It was just clarifying what I had asked the board president in regards to us streamlining our departments, and it seems that's what the comptroller was doing because the young man has said that's what they were looking to do. So they literally planned ahead. And that's what I'm hoping other directors and commissioners of departments start looking at. So I applaud them for doing that, because until we look at this city is in a different light that it was in the 18 and 1900s. We're never going to catch up. So I want to thank them for having that vision and foresight to do that.
Thank you, Madam Vice Chair, although I do wish we had the population growth we had back then. Real quickly, Madam Comptroller, on your division highlights, it does point out that under your purview is not only the telecommunications for the city, but the 911 system.
It does say that. And there's an explanation, which I'm sure you're, with Paul Payne's help here, especially with the 911 system. We have the section in our department called telecommunications. And of course, 911 is through telecommunications, telephone. And so the bill that the city receives citywide is paid through the comptroller's office. So that's our basic purview over 911. We don't hire 911 operators, and we don't single-handedly plan any of the activities of the 911 function. Is that correct, Paul?
Yes, it's the system, the call system.
The
Right.
hardware.
I just wanted to make sure.
The hardware, the telephones and the lines that are underground and all of that telecommunications hardware stuff.
Gotcha.
That comes through our office, and we pay the bills for all of that.
Does that include all the computer systems for 911? The reason I'm asking,
I
there's
guess.
been a lot of, there have been quite a few complaints about the
Well,
old.
that's a good question. I think when you think about that, you have to include IT because that's called data, and we're not in charge of data. Because we just had this talk for like hours and hours on a call, remember, with Nancy Cross, and so they were talking data. That's IT.
Okay, it would be
And then
helpful
you talk
just to.
to telecommunications, that's the comptroller. And so that's heavy, in terms of, and the clarity that I'm trying to make now is really to show you that there's two different things, but it comes together with communication. Telecommunications, telephones, and all of that stuff, with telephone stuff. Communications involve both data as well as telecommunications. And the reason I point it out, because that's to your question, and you want to know about the system. Those are combined. And so those people who know more about it can probably answer better than me, because on that call is when I learned, oh, gee, you got a data issue, which what you're referring to, problems. But it looks like, there's two lines that run. There's a line running for telecommunications and a line running for data. And so there was some things talked about on that call that we both were on, that we learned, and it's to your question. It is directly to your question. And now, even though I'm not giving you an answer, I'm giving you like kind of a breakdown in the weeds of, you do have both data, which is an IT issue, which there is a telecommunications issue as well. Our issue has to do with the telephones and upgrading the equipment and all of that, but not the data. But because they are working together to communicate in this new world of communication, they have to work together to reduce the issues. And so somebody has to say, well, is it a telecommunication issue or is it a data issue? Because it makes a difference if it's a data issue and not a telecommunication issue, and that's what we learned.
Right, well, in many instances, telephones and telecommunications happen over data lines. So there's a gray area here. It would be helpful, I think, just in the interest of kind of closing out this hearing today, none of us were on that call that you all most certainly enjoyed with Nancy Cross. So if you could maybe provide a follow-up with regards to what exactly on the 911 side of the telecommunications system under your purview, that would be helpful just to round out our, knowledge of
I can say
risk.
that it's not operations, and I think that's very fair.
Okay.
In terms of operations, it is not the operations of the 911.
Right, we understand that. I guess, one of the things that's come up quite frequently in some of the news stories about the function of 911 is some of the old systems, the computer systems, the phone systems, et cetera, that the 911 operators have pointed to as a problem. And so I think it would just be helpful to kind of understand what exactly is under your purview. So we can follow up with
So
that.
here's the other thing I will add, and the controversy is, on that call, was what you call backup. If it's a full data system without telecommunication, you lose telecommunication backup. So that's something that I will say because that became how we ended the call. Because the data people saying, you don't need the telephones. We all have cell phones now. Let's go away. Well, when you have a hardline telephone that's working and your system is down, which is data, pick up the phone if you still have them. If you don't have them because a decision was made that there was redundancy and all of that, which in the modern world with people who didn't grow up with the telephone like, I did, you wouldn't recognize that the need for communication, which is why I delineated telecommunication from communication, because you do have data and you have telecommunication, which are now on some of the lines, data lines, but you have telecommunication lines as well. Now, why is it important? Well, one of the reasons that we pointed out was important because of the courts. The courts is one of the systems that works on the city's budget. So a court is open 24 hours a day, all across the country. And if there is a need for a court communication by however means, if they only have the phone, then that's what they're going to use. So those are the kinds of things you have to be aware of when you talk about the question that you asked in the operation of it. We want to be efficient, but we also want to be able to communicate. And, communication is key in government as well as all organizations. And we want to make sure that we're making the best use of our equipment. And it changes often, as you know, especially data. Data changes a lot more than the telecommunication. But that has been upgrading over time as well. And they have been working together. There's different kinds of wires that's used now that wasn't used in the past. And I know you know all of this, some of it anyway, but it's still, there are individuals that say data is what we should be on. Others say, no, we still need both. And so that's a question that we will probably, if we come back to you with any kind of answer in terms of our thoughts on what you're asking, we'll come back with basically what I'm saying in terms of the fact that we do not participate in the operation, but we do participate in making sure that the telecommunications for the city of St. Louis, which has to do with the equipment, is operable.
Thank you, Madam Comptroller. So I'll just reiterate, I think the request of the committee would be to have kind of an understanding of the vacancy within the department, and then my request would be the understanding of what under the 911 system, the telecommunication portion of it falls under the comptroller, computers, phones, how that works structurally speaking would be very helpful. Okay, and with that, I thank you, Madam Comptroller, and as well as your staff for being here today.
And if I may, since I do have several of my employees here and several of them are new, if they can come up and introduce themselves and give you their positions, please. If we can start with Jamalia and Lisa, who are the females, and then all the gentlemen shall follow them.
Good afternoon. My name is Jamal Alat. I'm the new Fiscal Operations Support Manager for Internal Audit.
Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Harmon. I'm the Fiscal Operations Support Manager in the Comptroller's Office under the First Assistant to the Comptroller. And we handle the accounting services side. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Nodrick Tankins, and I am the Special Assistant to the Comptroller.
I'm Craig Simshauser. I'm the Asset Manager for the Comptrollers Group.
My name is Don Neese, and I'm the First Assistant to the Comptroller.
Good afternoon. I'm Leonard E. Bell Jr., the Second Assistant Comptroller, Second Assistant to the Comptroller.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for that, and thank you, committee. We appreciate you today.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we have concluded our order of business for the Budget and Public Employees Committee for today. Thank you all. Thank you, committee members, for successful first day here in our long and very involved budget process. With that, I'll take a motion
So moved.
to adjourn until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you.